Hey fellas, blah, 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 blah. Hey fellas, GGG did another interview. This time with Josh Strife, Hayes, three namer. Jonathan, I guess this is gonna be PoE2, right? PoE2 stuff. I'm not entirely certain, but I'm just gonna be leveling up this guy. He's level 70. Just got into maps. I don't think I've played him at all. Maybe I have played him a little bit since. Oh, I think he was. I was watching a T1 game and think it was just open. But we're gonna be leveling this guy and listening to see if we learn anything new about PoE2 and maybe PoE1 questions. I have no idea what this interview is gonna be about.
A
Let's
super
listen.
special, very sexy guest with me today. Jonathan, hello.
Sexy.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Those
Jesus.
are, the audio levels are already good now.
Oh, I don't know if my audio levels are good. I forgot to check that.
The biggest question I can see in the
It
chat
seems
so
loud.
far is, who is Jonathan? So,
Seems
Jonathan,
loud.
introduce yourself to all the lovely people.
So my name's Jonathan Rogers, and I'm the game director on Path of Exile 2.
Path of Exile 2.
Just
Now,
give
I
a
quite
moment
like
to-
Path of Exile 1, so I've got a list of questions that I'd like to ask you about Path of Exile 2. Is that okay?
Absolutely, go for it.
Fantastic. Now, everyone in my chat, allow me to just explain there's something special about this interview. I have a thing on my stream where I don't ever want my audience to be overwhelmed, but I also don't want them to be underwhelmed. I'd like them to be whelmed. So I'd like people to leave this interview saying, that was an interview that happened with Jonathan. That's the energy that we're going for.
I'm confused.
Okay, nothing too great, so no secrets, nothing amazing.
Does he want us to be
Jonathan, you've already done,
confused?
like, 4 or 5 of these
Confused.
interviews. How have they gone so far?
I'm pretty happy with them. Honestly, I could just talk about random topics all day. Like, I'm a bit of a talker, honestly. So, yeah, like, just feel free.
He's a bit of a yapper.
We don't have to even talk about PoE2 if you want. We could just talk about random game development topics. I'll just talk endlessly. So, whatever you're interested in.
In that case, Jonathan, let's talk about temporary buff items, because I was playing Fallout New Vegas recently, so everyone in my chat has just gone mad because they know exactly where this line of thinking is going to. Allow me
Temporary
to explain
buffs.
what we're gonna do with this. I like Path of Exile 1, I want to know about Path of Exile 2. I've got a list of questions from the community and a couple of questions that I have written myself that I want to pose to you. However, I'm very aware that all of the interviews you've done...
I like the
have
first
been
question
with
already.
Very high level, very enfranchised, very skillful players who understand the minutiae of this game far more than I do. So I want to keep these questions to more of a high-level game design overview perspective. You okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. Let's go with the first question I saw on the... For those of you watching this video, by the way, I have edited it so you're going to see the questions appear on the screen. Jonathan is not going to see that, so...
Well,
he's working with less
I
information.
don't think that video's
The
up
first
yet,
question that I saw
so
on the
I'm
Path of
just
Exile
watching your
2
VOD.
segment is when you said, I'm going to do an interview with Josh Strife Hayes, everyone responded, who is Josh Strife Hayes? People want to see and hear about
He's a
your
memer.
content and not have yet another interview with
Memer,
a total random
second
guy
monitor
related to
content,
Path of Exile. That is a fair
third
point.
monitor on a bad day.
So, I love video games in general. I've made a lot of my career.
If you don't know, that's a
MMORPGs, and
joke that
while I
he.
wouldn't necessarily class Path of Exile as an MMORPG,
I watched him do his first
I
playthrough.
class it as an online RPG that can be played with other people, and I enjoy doing that. So
This
I
character
am
does
just
not have the
doing
damage.
videos, and I've been doing that for many years. Jonathan, why should people care that you are making Path of Exile 2? What do you bring to the table? Boast about yourself, Jonathan.
This is that's a hard one, honestly, because I think I've always just had the opinion of myself that I'm just some random guy. Like, I honestly, in fact, it's kind of scary to think, but as I look around the office, that I'm one of the people who is the most experienced in here, in this room at this point. I've always sort of felt myself being the kind of the random youngster who kind of, has just managed to somehow get a
All
job
right,
in game development.
relax,
And
Jonathan.
So, yes, it's very weird.
You can't have
at
gray
this stage,
hair
like, oh,
and be
suddenly
calling
I'm looking
yourself a
around, I'm like,
youngster,
oh, crap,
okay?
I'm actually experienced and I'm supposed to know what I'm doing at this point. So,
Is there multi-pros in this
hopefully,
map?
I actually have some
I
idea,
know
but I
these guys
think
just have
that,
multi-pros.
probably one of the main skills that I have, and one of the main skills that I think any good game designer needs to have, is actually just an eye to know when things are wrong. And this is a thing that is one of the hardest skills to develop, and one of the most important skills to develop, because if you can
Or have a
start
really
wrong,
good QA team.
then you can take stuff that other people have made and make it good. and I think that that's actually really, really important, just by removing all the bad. And so that's a quite an important thing. But one kind of horrible thing about it is that it means that when you play every other game, if your sense for brokenness is tuned to an absolute peak, it can make the experience rather unpleasant, because all you see is the jank. And all I'm looking through when I'm playing things is just how horrible this is. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, probably where one of my main skills is just seeing when things are bad and then saying, okay, like, we need to fix this problem. And it honestly, it seems like a simple thing, but it is quite a surprisingly difficult thing to get a skill for.
So when this project was started, they all looked around and said, we're about to make one of the most ambitious, potentially largest ARPGs on the market. Who can we, task with this incredible responsibility? And then someone just went, Jonathan's got an eye for making sure, stuff isn't shit. He'll be okay with it. He's free for the next couple of years. Throw him on it. And you just kind of ended up there, and now you're guiding a team to make this game. What's it like going from seeing yourself as just the kind of kid in the corner to the guy that's now responsible for a game that hundreds of thousands of people are pretty
Millions.
hyped for? No pressure, Jonathan, but it's all on you.
It is very scary.
Josh is such a fucking memer.
It's also very scary because, there's this whole sort of legacy of PoE that we have to make sure.
Yeah,
is
I don't
respected as
envy
well,
him.
something like that.
Don't fuck
But at the
that
same
up.
time, I tend to be this kind of person.
Do
who's
not
just
fuck
like,
that
if
up.
things aren't working, I'm kind of like, this is crap. We need to do something about it, regardless of how hard it might be, regardless of how important that people might think the current way it works is. We need to be able to do something about that.
I feel like Jonathan's a little low.
That kind of means that you get into these like moments that are quite, difficult with team members and all sorts of stuff, but also then worrying with the community, right? What's the community going to think of this when we talk about how this works? So like that can be really, really concerning. And yeah, I think with PoE2, like
Give me two.
the hope is, of course, that you announce some stuff and it's just like, oh, everyone just loves immediately everything you're doing. But
Okay.
because we're mostly talking at this point to an existing community of PoE1 players, there's a large amount of skepticism from some of them about the kind of changes they make. That we're making.
So much
And
skepticism.
so I think that we did like an event recently, and I think that the people who played the game did mostly get a pretty good, like, favorable impression of the kind of thing that we're doing. But it's certainly the case that if you just tell people, like, here's the kind of changes we have to make the game good, they don't necessarily sound like the kind of things that a PoE1 player immediately is like, oh yeah, that's the great thing. I mean, we can obviously present certain features, right? We can do that kind of thing, but it's like the big kind of like thing that everyone's like, oh, you're slowing the game down. That's like a huge thing that people often talk about.
They are,
and
but not the way
so
people
that's
think.
the kind of stuff that, like, making these kinds of decisions is tough. So I feel like I sort of went slightly off topic there, but either way,
we're
kind
going
of
to do a
the
lot
thing
of
that
off-topic stuff. I've got questions
Yeah,
that will
for
just go
sure.
rambling, because for everyone in the chat, by the way, there's a couple of, it's about 1,500 people so far just joining us to have this chat. Jonathan is responsible.
Oh, he does have the
for
questions
building
on the screen.
The kind of game development of Path of Exile 2. I very much enjoy Path of Exile 1, and we both enjoy gaming systems, so we're going to be talking about lots of different things. But as I said earlier,
Oh, no,
Jonathan's
he
already
doesn't.
done a lot of
Never mind.
these interviews with players and content creators who are far more knowledgeable about the game than I am. So I need to ask more general questions, because I tend to come at things from the kind of perspective of the casual player, the everyman, if you will. The guy that just about scrapes by killing Katava after dying 7 or 8 times and running back in. And don't worry, we'll get
He's
to
a
things
unique
like
one.
Righteous Fire and Death
He
Rate
is a
later.
unique one.
There's a question on that. If in the chat right now you have a question that you would like me to ask to Jonathan about anything to do with either Path of Exile 1, Path of Exile 2, or general gaming stuff, please make sure that you type it
Where do you
in.
get that
The
shirt
first
from?
question of who are we has now been pretty much established. I'm just a guy that plays games,
God,
and I love
Josh
that the chat
Truss
has
is
said
so,
you have the energy
dapper.
of
Is
a
that the
guy
correct
that
word?
didn't know he was going for a job interview, wandered into the kind of game development room, and now you're in charge. And you just haven't corrected
Bro,
anyone yet. You've just gone with
They
it.
put two yappers in the room together. What is this interview going to be?
I like that. It's a pretty good. Let's go.
I actually did want to be a game developer even when I was a kid. Like, I really did. It's funny, 'cause, like, it is actually not a job I randomly walked into. I did, it's funny. Even when I was 10 years old, I knew I wanted to be a game developer. It's one of those things that at that point, I kind of actually lost all interest in pretty much any other subject of school or anything else like that. And I was just like, you know what, I'm being a game developer. I don't need to care about all of this other, random stuff in school.
I thought
this is
that
what I'm
too.
doing. So it was kind of always one of those things. And to me, it was all about like, where am I going to find that opportunity? And Chris, I met when I was probably about, how old would I have been? 13, something like that. He was also someone who was very interested in game
Chris
development.
was 40.
So I kind of just latched onto him. He was actually a bit older than I was. And then
Oh, no.
where, he was getting to the point where he thought we could maybe start a game studio. I was kind of already there, being friends with him. And I was kind of like,
Chris, good idea. Let's do it.
I need to be part of that. And so the initial, like the start of our company, like Chris was very much the one who.
When did it become a
had
company?
the vision of what it was
Like,
that we were going to make, and I just knew that I wanted to be a game developer.
few
Like,
leagues
that was
in.
my thing. I just knew that was my one shining star. That is what I'm going to do with my life. And so. And as I said, Chris was the one who was like, here's a game that we can make that's going to be extremely successful. And I was like, you know what? I mean, certainly I am a big fan of Diablo 2, but if you were to ask me what my favorite games were at that time, it wasn't at the top of the list, surprisingly.
What was?
Probably Half-Life at the time.
Choice.
I would say, or maybe StarCraft. I mean, these
Again,
are just
good
like late
choice.
'90s bangers, right? Like, they're just the games that everyone loved. But like those are two. Final Fantasy VII.
Are
as
you
well,
getting
but
asked if
again,
I want
we're
birthday
talking
cake?
about like those three. I would say from my childhood.
I
that-
mean, the
those are the
reason I've
games
got
that I probably-
Strife as a kind of middle pseudonym is because I loved
Right,
Cloud
right.
Strife so much in the Final Fantasy VII game. That's where it came
Right,
from.
right.
I absolutely adored that. And we're going to get onto a question later about what childhood games have kind of inspired choices that you've made in game development, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice specifically. But there's a really important
Whatever game
question in
Chris
the chat
Wilson's
right
playing
now
that
we
week.
need to address is what is on your shirt?
Oh,
Because
wow,
people
that's
are
how it
loving
felt.
the design on the front of it.
Right, it's a T-shirt that was actually designed by one of the Path of Exile community.
Okay.
So based on
Whoa.
Michael Wyatt Aotaro. And
Josh, the mic.
Basically, it's just but it's obviously we have like various sort of moldy design in the game quite a lot.
Imagine if he just decided to just move his mic around, fuck with us the whole interview.
It's actually my favorite T-shirt, but it was designed by one of the fans.
Oh.
I think we had a competition or something like that, and it was I think it was for sale at ExileCon or something like that. I don't know.
It's crazy. I asked about the t-shirt. And he tells me. Can Jonathan hear me
Actually,
right now?
like my wardrobe at this point pretty much consists entirely of Path of Exile T-shirts. I have literally hundreds of them, and literally nothing else. So every day I just pick another one up.
At the next convention, we just see you scavenging around all of the boxes of shirts. Be like, this will do me for the year. This will hold me.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, my wardrobe just looks like that scene out of Dragon Ball Z. It's literally just hanging up white shirts and waistcoats. It's the same
Right.
outfit repeatedly. So I totally get that.
Right.
We've gone through one question.
gone
We've been here
through both
15
of
minutes.
those
It's going good. We've got quite a
phases.
few left to go. Guys, if in the chat, if you do want to ask questions, please feel free to ask, and we will. I'll try and get them through. Let's go to the next question, which is super important. Question one, technically, because now we've kind of established who we are. This is a very important question to kind of set the vibe of the entire interview. How's your day going?
It's okay. Could be better. Bit of sleep deprivation. I've got a 4-year-old that can be.
Oh, shit.
The kids can be tough, but pretty good overall, I would say.
Sweet, I appreciate that. That's good. Now we've set the vibe for it. Let's go to the next very important question. Question 2. Why Path of Exile 2? Why not just make a big expansion of Path of Exile 1? What?
Let's see if I can answer the questions before they happen. So, the expansion of Path of Exile 1 was always gonna... That's what they intended. It was just gonna be an expansion. But then the scope started to get larger and larger with features, and then they're like, this can't just be its own expansion. It became so much more.
What actually required you guys to say, we need a whole new game instead of just making an expansion?
So, Path of Exile 2 really is the most absurd feature creep story that ever existed in the world.
I've watched too
honestly.
many of these interviews.
So
I know all the
very first thing that
answers.
happened was, okay, what is currently the worst thing about Path of Exile? And the thing that we said that we weren't liking was actually melee combat.
I have
were
got.
very
I think
unhappy.
question 7 is why do you hate
Yeah,
melee?
yeah, yeah.
So we'll get to
So
that
we were
eventually.
actually we were very unhappy. It's like, well, why is the melee combat bad? Well, the reason it's bad is because it's very hard for us to make new melee skills. Well, why is it hard for us to make new melee skills? Well, the reason for that is because the rigs for the characters were literally the first thing that got made back at the very beginning in 2007, very early 2007. And so they are the
We
oldest.
aren't
on Steam.
happy
Not only
with
that, but they were
melee. We want to
made
make it
by
worse.
someone who wasn't exactly a world-class rigger at the time. You know what I mean? Like, we were a studio with like a few people in New Zealand. It's not like we had access to like all of these, you know, things. So that sort of core thing, the
Chris's
character
Garage
rig
is where they were initially made,
was
probably.
something that was made at the earliest point with the least experience. And the problem with character rigs is not only did we have a character rig that was made that way, but we also had a different one for every character class, which means that every animation you make, you have to make 7 times.
Jesus
What was
And-
the
Christ.
benefit of having a different rig for every class? Did
There
did the
wasn't- there
differences
wasn't one.
facilitate that?
There wasn't one. We just didn't think about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
It
simple.
probably.
It's that simple.
I know it
So hang on,
existed
I know
back
there's
then.
that joke about feature bloat going into Path of Exile 1 and the fact there's just too much stuff and feature creep.
Some
You're
of
saying
those
from
existed.
the very first day, you had different rigs for different classes with no real reason to have that.
PoE's
Yes,
old, but it's not
Oh, we've
that
started. That's the
old.
foundation. The game is built on too much stuff. This is beautiful.
Yep,
Sorry, carry on.
absolutely.
Why do we need a whole new game instead of an
Yeah,
expansion?
yeah. So then, we're like and the problem with this as well is that so all of your armor.
I'm very, very happy they went with a whole nother game. The only problem I have with the whole nother game thing is I don't like the idea of them continuing Path of Exile 1. Yeah, I don't like the idea of that.
In the game are rigged to those character rigs, right? So not
Oh,
only if you
God.
want to change this, not only do you have to redo all the armors in the game and all the character animations as well, but like it's just a huge task. So we set out, the first thing we set out to do was, okay, even though this is a huge task, even though it's going to take us a really long time, we're going to remake these character rigs. And then when we did that, and we started seeing the animation that we could do on the new rigs, we're like, okay, well this looks a lot better, but one of the other issues that we've got is at the beginning of the game also just looks really old. We really should do some refreshing of the art. So then Eric set out, he's like, we're gonna do some refreshes of this art and try to make the beginning of the game look better again. And it only took a little bit of time doing that before we're like, okay, well, if we're making new areas, we might as well not bother just remaking the previous areas. What we really should do is make some new areas, because then, you know, that will be new content and it takes the same amount of effort anyway. So we might as well just do that. So then we're like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make an alternative Act 1 that you can play instead of Act 1 in the game. So, or even what we'll do is we thought maybe we'll replace Act 1 with another version of it, like that you start somewhere else and we've got, like, you know, and effectively these and it worked like this. So we're sort of doing that, and then eventually we got to the point where we realized that we really wanted to make a whole new campaign, because, you know, the old campaign really was starting to show its age. Like, we could do a lot better now, all this sort of stuff. So we just sort of went along this way, and that point where we're like, we're going to make a new campaign, that was where we ended up when we announced PoE2 initially, where it was going to be the same game but with 2 campaigns.
I think I don't... Have I ever heard that they were making an alternate campaign? That I don't know if that was ever heard that they were going to make an alternate, like, leveling Act 1 and stuff. I wonder how much progress they made into that, because the story obviously can't be the same as PoE2. That'd be interesting to see footage of that, to see what it looks like. It probably looks super bare bones, but I'm curious where they would have gone with that.
So your
And then from
solution
there-
to the game containing too much stuff was to make more stuff.
They're fucking with us. The audio keeps changing.
We made way too much stuff when we started this. We've made it difficult for ourselves. So what we're going to do is make far more stuff.
There he
and
goes.
then it'll
Yeah,
be,
he turned his own audio
you know,
back.
it'll
He's
be
fucking
better.
with us.
We'll dig ourselves out of this hole by digging more hole. And eventually you realized we've just got a second game on our hands now.
Exactly. It literally was the point where we're like, we're remaking everything. The actual moment of we have to change from making an expansion to PoE1 to making it as PoE2 as just separate, was just the point where we realized that things were changing so much that we couldn't even really viably patch it into Path of Exile 1 without it causing significant problems in the community. Just like, even just that migration would have been absolutely insane. And so they're like, oh, okay, so effectively, Path of Exile 2 is a like weird cancerous growth from PoE1 that kind of metastasized into its own entity, in a way, which doesn't sound like the most amazing birth of a game project ever, but surprisingly, that is kind of how it
looking at
works.
this and going, we can fix this. We can design more stuff and fix this, and it'll be great. That is, by the way, that is going to be the quote that the chat take and run with, and that's why Jonathan's in charge of this, because he will make memory.
I wonder how much money, not they lost, and not time wasted. Because you could say, that time, was used to, and ideas used to create Path of Exile 2, but I wonder how many times they've, I guess not just with creation of Path of Exile 2, they've went with an idea and scrapped it and been like, oh, fuck, that was a whole week of, like, making a league or something that, we didn't use any of it. And it was, like, all a complete waste. But I wonder for Path of Exile 2, how much of the time initially was just like, wow, this whole, like, we got through like 1 and 2 acts, but we're not going to be using any of it. Oh, we animated all these skills on these other characters. We're not going to be using any of those. I wonder how much of that happened. That's scary to think about, because they probably lost a lot of them. They didn't it's hard, it's weird to say they didn't lose. Oh, I wasn't paying attention. What the hell? Anyways, they didn't lose money, they just didn't use it as effective. I don't know, you get what I'm trying to say here. Yeah, and I wonder, that was my problem with them, like, continuing Path of Exile 1. It feels like they're, kind of tangent on that, but it feels like they're hedging their bets, to like, oh, if this game sucks, we always have PoE1 to fall back on. That's what it feels like. I know that's they're not their reasoning. That's the feeling that I get from it. My feelings are valid. Continue.
Memorable quotes for this game. For anyone who's just joining us in the stream, we've now got 2,500 people hanging out with us. Jonathan's the game developer, game designer, the kind of lead of Path of Exile 2, and I'm a guy that likes games, so I'm asking him lots of questions. However, I'm aware... Jonathan, how many of these interviews have you done so far? You spoke to Preach, you spoke to Scissoran...
Yeah, but I don't know, probably about 5. I don't know. I'm not actually keeping that too hard of a count on it.
You just turn up and give
like
your microphone, you just speak to whoever's there, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much. I mean,
so they've given you
Sis, Gazzy, Ziggy,
I've watched
Rise,
it was really good. It was
Woody Joe,
people have asked you so many in-depth questions.
Josh,
and we need to kind of vary away
who am I
from
missing?
the super in-depth, because not everyone is a super in-depth hardcore and franchise player. Some people
DM?
are casuals.
No, that
some
was
people
with,
care about you.
that was with Gazzy.
So let's go on. So the answer to Path of Exile.
Oh, and what's 7? And
the scope of what you did was just so massive that you wouldn't have been able to integrate it back into Path of Exile 1 even if you wanted to.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Let's go to question 3, a really important question. Could you beat Chris Wilson in a fist fight?
No.
No.
Jonathan, I'm rooting for you here.
Chris is a big guy.
I need to know.
Here's the thing. Chris, when he was younger, did martial arts, so that's definitely pointed to his favor. He's definitely got that on me. I've never done anything like that. He also goes to
really
the gym
tall
now very frequently.
Oh, is Chris hench? Next time we see him, Chris is just massive and buff.
Their whole studio got like really fit. Like Mark got really fit too.
I think he's also just taller. That's always a
Okay, so the next time
Jonathan, just by having a kid, has probably gotten a lot skinnier.
The PoE1 and the PoE2 kind of armies running at each other with Chris leading one.
He looks like his face is thinning out.
At the front of the PoE2 boys as well. We need to know that you've got us, that you're supporting us, Jonathan. I need to know that I'm following you.
I'm game for anything.
Total side tangent. I feel like people in general are getting skinnier. I don't know what happened. Feels like, oh, I went to the gym. You know, I'm gymming. Gym day. It's very, very common in people's lives now. I don't know why that
But
is.
yes.
What
Fantastic,
started it?
excellent. What we do after the interview is up to us. Okay, question 3, that was very important. Could Jonathan beat Chris Wilson in a fight? Answer, probably not, because Chris has trained and is going to the gym. Jonathan, what's your favourite class in the game?
In PoE2 or PoE1?
Let's start with PoE1, then go on to 2.
Monk and
In PoE1, I'd say it's
Witch?
the Ranger.
Why?
fuck.
Is it because melee sucks?
Yes.
He's gonna say monk then.
That is the reason.
Sorry, it was just, there was no hesitation at all with that answer.
Right. And in PoE2, I would say it's the monk. And
Ha,
I've actually
I
asked
knew it.
about this before, but it's effectively because it was the first time when I feel like we actually managed to get melee not to suck.
Okay, so you're playing it like,
and so
this is what it should be like, this is how it should work,
Yes,
this is
exactly. Yes, that's when I felt like we finally hit something. So yeah, that's kind
Hey,
of the
what
reason
happened to
why-
the-
but, that being said, like I mean, every one that we make new, I'm like I start to appreciate again the most. But I still think monk is really where my heart is.
I love, I've just got this image in my head now, I love this, of you
I don't know
playing
why
Path
he's-
of Exile 1 for so long before you finally throw the controller at him like,
I
melee
don't know why
sucks,
that
I'm gonna make a
happens.
whole new game. And then you just, this ended up from it, and you were like, that's how it should be. Your personal goal was just
I
to
caught
make
it
this
early,
class
though.
that worked.
But it really is though. Like my actual goal is like, you know, I will keep making Path of Exile until we have arrived at a game that I actually think is perfect in each respect. You know, like so long as there's still something I'm unhappy with, then I'm gonna keep on going. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel like we managed to get things perfect.
That's
in
scary to
PoE2
me.
In PoE1.
That's a good attitude to have, I like.
It's scary because, man, thinking of like projects I've worked on, I've never felt like, oh, this is complete, this is done, 100%. I'm happy with it. I feel like I could always go back and work on something longer. Hell, editing a video or a thumbnail, it's just like, oh, I could do better. This could do better. Oh, but it's 6 a.m. You should go to sleep.
So you know,
I applaud them
that's
for
why
that.
we're doing this.
All right, cool. So we've answered question 3. Let's go on to question 4. I think a lot of people, and this is about hardcore content versus
Could you beat
casual
me in a
content,
fight?
the kind of ultra end game 1% versus the vast majority of people just installing it. I think a lot of people, whenever they're in that kind of echo chamber of high-level gameplay, whether it's Reddit or Twitch or forums, because if you're watching on Twitch right now, chances are you're already one of the more enfranchised players. But from every game that I've looked at, every game designer that I've spoken to, the vast majority of a player base is always a casual player base. They're not actually seeing the ultra hardcore, ultra high level stuff.
But a
They see
casual
the
PoE
start,
player,
they see
it's different
most
than a
of the middle of
casual
it, and then maybe
video
they
gamer.
get to the end and kill the final boss.
Let me guess the answer here. So they've said before they develop things that they enjoy to play, and then take community feedback from there. Can I get more specific with the answer though? We just make a game that we think is fun, and we take community feedback and we learn and build off that for future expansions.
So how much of the game development time is based on casual content versus ultra hardcore content? And how can you effectively work with both groups of players?
So I guess I wouldn't necessarily stratify them into two groups. It really is much more of a spectrum. And so then the question really then becomes is, okay, so presumably we want to make it so the game gets harder as you go through it. Although that isn't a given, right? Like we could make a game which is approximately even difficulty through the whole game. And I think that that is actually what a lot of games do target. But because we sort of have an end game and we want to have it so that there's a lot of room for growth of your skill because we're and to get into why that is for a second, because of the fact that we want to have a game where you can come back and play league upon league, and so we want to kind of have like a skill ceiling that is high enough that it can survive that
Wait.
process.
It's cooking.
We want to have eventually you get to the point where the game becomes
I might not be wrong.
hard enough that most people can't get through it.
Okay.
Right? Now, where should that place be? That is a tricky one.
I would say it's going to be probably after the final, story beat, if you will, after the
Certainly
final
after that,
narrative
yep.
beat.
Certainly after that. Then the question is, how far into endgame is it? You want people to get to endgame and play endgame certainly a certain amount. Now, I don't have a real answer for you exactly where this point should be per se, but what I would say is that as the game continues, that point has kind of like for PoE1, that point has kind of crept up a bit. Like the expectation of how high
I was wrong.
through the content that a player
Get a better
expects to be
answer.
able to get
Nice.
has increased, and that's actually caused some kind of effects that are
I like being wrong.
maybe annoying
like
is
it.
the wrong word.
Get
but
off
like it
on
kind
it.
of has changed like a little bit, like the way that that we've had to design things. So the expectation, I suppose you might say, is that and I use this word very loosely, that a casual player should be able to get all the way up to kind of like T16 maps and complete them and have that be fine.
Very, very easy.
And what that means is that, yeah, like as I said, it kind of breaks a little bit of the sort of design that you want to try and do, because you want that difficulty scale somewhat linearly, but what we've ended up with is this weird knee in the curve where like the game goes from like kind of a relatively, well, once again, flat is the wrong word, flat relatively speaking, difficulty curve, to this point where suddenly you get to the very end of the end game and everything just becomes like shockingly difficult. I don't know that I'm quite happy with that, but I also don't know what we can quite do about it. It's a little bit tricky.
See, to me, there were those two kind of casual moments in the Path of Exile 1 narrative where the first one is you fight Kitava, and the second one is you effectively kill Kitava, and you lose 25% of your resistances kind of
30.
permanently. That is almost a hard step down in player power, a hard step up in difficulty.
Right.
Like as soon as you complete this content, 30%. Thank you in chat. As soon as you do this content, the rest of the content is going to be. You're going to find it more difficult, even if it's exactly the same difficulty as it was before, because your character is weakened specifically.
Right.
And it's such unless you've specifically built around this, which you would only know to do if you were a returning player or a more hardcore player using the wiki, unless you'd built around this incoming
There should be a cinematic or something that
moment
shows
of
that you
difficulty.
get weaker right then.
Do you think that is a smooth moment of difficulty, or do you think there's a way that you can do that better?
So I'll first talk about the reason why we do that at all. So there's one of these things where a lot of game designers, if you want to have something like resistances, and you want it so that throughout the game you can get more and more of these resistances, so by effectively the amount of you get gear which has more and more resistance on it, like you want numbers to go up as it were. Then effectively you need to find some way to make it so that there's some form of diminishing returns in the calculation. Because if we just had percentages and you could just go up forever, you'd either reach you'd either have to give such small amounts at the beginning of the game that the difference is that feels irrelevant. Like if you get an item that's like 2% fire resistance, you're like, well, screw that. What's the point of this? You know what I mean? It's useless. That sucks definitely. So we want you to actually have a reasonable numbers at the beginning. So we want you to get up to numbers like therefore 75% at the beginning of like somewhat not too far into the game. What we can do then, one way to solve this, which is the way we have, is that we can just effectively have resistance penalties.
Holy
that take
shit.
off every now and then. But the way that other games do it is they have ratings. And an example of a rating is something that we do have, is something like armor, where it's just a number that doesn't have any inherent meaning, but there's an equation somewhere that backs what that does, and we can put whatever complexity we want into that, although ideally it's not too insane, but like we can put complexity behind that that can get us to the right numbers. So a game can have, like you get like 30 armor at the start of the game, and that feels like it means something as far as reducing the damage your character takes. And then you can also get 1,000 armor late in the game, and it also has some effect, and that's sort of compatible as well. So that's the rating approach. And games actually more and more, like game designers love ratings because you can just use them to effectively get whatever curve you want. It's controllable. You just give out a certain amount of stuff, and it all kind of works. But the problem is I kind of don't like them because they don't feel real. Like if I was giving you like lightning resistance points that, like, you know, like 16 lightning resist points that kind of weren't inherently tied to anything particularly, then that would, I feel, just be a worse experience. Like, you understand what you're getting when you get 16% lightning resist. And sure, there's some things where you get penalties later on, but like inherently the stat is easy to understand. And for some reason, it's okay when you're talking about armor points, and you can just accept that, and it feels intuitive. But yet it wouldn't if you're getting lightning resistance points. Like, it just doesn't feel the same. So we only ever use ratings if they just kind of have this.
Would they ever do armor
strange
percentages
feeling of it's
and
just
remove
somehow
flat?
okay. And I don't really know quite how to say when one is versus the other, but that's how we feel.
That'd be
So that's the
kinda
reason
crazy.
why we have this. So we need some way to decrease your resistances. Now, the next thing I want to say is that one thing I actually like is that, and this is more of a thing when you're talking about going between one act to another. When you go from one act to another, I like there to be a feeling of, I guess, tension and release, where you do have a different experience.
I'm scared that I'm gonna die because I'm looking,
from
I'm
one act to
watching
the other, like,
them more than I
normally
am
it's the
the
opposite direction
screen.
what you just said, right? Like, it gets hard up towards the end of Act 1, but you get to the beginning of Act 2 and it's a bit easier again, just because, like, you know, like you sort of get that experience. So that doesn't necessarily gel very well with the whole, like, taking resistances away from your character. But like, there is this thing of, like, of if we, like, so another thing we could have done, for example, with the resistance thing is, like, every level we just slowly reduce your resistance.
Motherfuckers in last epoch.
Worse than having a moment where it happens, because, like, as I said, when you're changing from one experience to another, having the feeling of, like, okay, now I was having to deal with this, now I'm having to deal with that. Like, it's just that more sort of binary thing that occurs is just a better feel. So I guess.
Yes, I know, last epoch doesn't do it each level. It's each level of the zone, so it doesn't matter what the character level is. It's the character of the zone. Because they do pen, and pen is 1% per... fuck you.
I guess that's
Dog
the sort of
shit
nebulous
system.
cloud of thoughts that I have around this issue. So that's kind of why it is, and, like, why we did it this way as opposed to another way. As for, is it a good idea to do that as you get into maps? I guess I must have at some point felt like it was, because we certainly decided.
Imagine you defeat the pinnacles and it goes
but I
down
would say
again.
that the intention behind this is not so much to say to the player, hey, you know, you're going into endgame, now I'm going to screw you. The intention is more around, we need to solve this problem with increasing stats, and we need some good way to deliver that. Where are we going to do it? So I guess that is maybe a somewhat unsatisfactory answer to the question of why.
It's a complex thing. I mean, Path of Exile is the amount of questions we're having in the chat. I can see we've had 2,000 people raid. We're up to about 5,000 people are hanging out and watching you answer these questions now, which is fantastic. But to me, Path of Exile has, and we'll get onto this specifically later, a lot of complexity creep, a lot of feature creep. And when you talk about the fact that there is an
Impossible not to have, though.
A kind of calculation that takes
love
into
it.
account armor value,
It's a
takes
drug.
into account all those other numbers. I almost picture that in the office you open a door to, like, a side office where originally there was maybe a server or a computer that was working out all these calculations, but it's so incredibly complicated now that when you open that door, it's just this kind of pulsating void of energy that kind of runs the game, and no one's entirely sure how every armor
Except
value
for
works.
Mark,
It just
the
does
only one
work.
that knows it
And
all.
we
There is a
hope that it
person.
stays like that.
There is a person who basically understands how it all works.
Oh, yeah, Mark.
1.
Yeah,
What's it called?
I was
The
right.
first Mark we
Yeah.
hired as opposed to the second Mark we hired. He actually,
Mark
I would
lives
say,
in
has
that
probably
room.
one of the more encyclopedic knowledges of how all of that stuff works. And there is an absurd amount of stats in PoE, like, truly absurd.
Every league, it's just like, oh,
I would
fuck,
say
I
a
didn't
number,
know
but
that was
I'm
a
probably
thing.
out of date. But it wouldn't even surprise me if the number was over 50,000 stats. It might even be up to 100,000 stats at this point.
So I picture
Like, it's
him just
absolutely
sitting in
outrageous.
the office now, kind of almost floating in midair with his legs crossed, and someone walks in and just goes, "What does this gem do?" And you show him, and he specifically tells you exactly how it works, combined with everything else and what it can link up with.
And all the problems.
Pretty much, yes. He is certainly the whole of the knowledge. And the scary thing is, there are so many implications at this point to change anything. Like, you change
That man must
anything,
be getting
there are, like,
paid.
10 other things that break. And
'Cause
it's
if
like,
he
you know,
leaves,
holy
what the
crap,
fuck
like,
do you
just the
do?
amount of stuff that it would be literally impossible to fully QA this game to fully know the repercussion of every single change we make. Yeah, it's honestly terrifying. And then you look at, like, the number of sort of economic exploits that came out of the stuff we did in the last league. Like, a lot of that stuff was just not predictable. Like you need the hundreds of thousands of players to find this stuff, and it's because there are stats that
They didn't
people
find the
forget about. Like you know,
or
there
didn't
are
become
mechanics that
public.
exist that no.
The logbook thing didn't become public until today. A lot of people were doing it, but it wasn't public knowledge. That's crazy. What, 2 weeks in? Are we on week 2? We're not on week 3 yet, right? And still, like, super broken combinations of things are coming to the surface. There's probably even more that people aren't talking about yet.
No one even remembered that can be used as part of interaction with something. Yeah, like it really would be impossible to find everything.
So I very much love the card game Magic the Gathering, and I think this actually ties into the complexity. We were talking about this briefly when we were doing a sound check before this whole stream went live. You used to play, was it drafting Lorwyn, wasn't it?
Yeah, we drafted tons at the beginning.
Now, to me, Magic the Gathering is one of those games where the more cards they bring out, they completely forget that they will interact with old cards in ways that they never imagined because there are just so many cards. I mean, rip my boy Birthing Pod, I am still a Birthing Pod player. I know that card has to get banned because it's too powerful. And there's a couple of other games that actually took Magic the Gathering as inspiration. I think the most famous one would be Guild Wars 1, which you can... Have you played Guild Wars 1 before, Jonathan?
Absolutely. In fact, it was both Chris and I played a bunch of Guild Wars 1, and we were very much... I actually took a huge amount of inspiration from that game as well, in various ways. Yeah.
So tell me, what... Because for anyone in the chat who hasn't played Guild Wars 1, I love the fact that when you go back to a city or a safe zone, you can set up your character's attacks, and I believe it's almost done like a hand of cards. I think it's 7 or 8 attacks that you can give yourself, 7 or 8 skills, and then you go to the adventure zone and you use the skills to fight. And then when you go back into a city, you can change around. I
moved that keybind. I don't know where it is on my keyboard.
Cities, and you can even take skills away from monsters. But ultimately, it's almost like setting up a deck of cards that you then go to fight with. And I really enjoy that. So when I see games that have taken anything from Guild Wars 1, I'm happy. If you say you've taken stuff from Guild Wars 1, talk me through it, Jonathan. In fact, let's make this broader. What video game?
Let's just start playing Guild Wars right now on stream.
Stolen from for Path of Exile 2.
I mean, I think it would be hard almost to come up with a list of games I haven't stolen from at this point. Like every time we make a list.
Okay, don't use the word stolen for legal reasons.
Mechanics from non-action RPGs and bringing them into an action RPG. So like, I mean, I tend to play a lot of different things. But I mean, yeah, like honestly, it's hard to even list them all because we're constantly.
Tarky showing Backpack Warrior, and then we got Sanctum.
Examples, maybe a mechanic
Backpack
that you're trying
Warrior,
to
Backpack Hero,
or a mechanic that you are proud of that you have basically just ripped off from somewhere else. Because there's nothing new under the sun. All of my YouTube ideas were taken from other channels. I just managed to bring them all together. You steal from everything. The best way to be original is to learn how to hide your sources. That's what I was always taught. So can you give us maybe 1 or 2 examples of mechanics that maybe players did or didn't know about that you can say, we started with this that already existed?
It's honestly really hard to think about, but it's kind of weird because a lot of the time I'm looking at things and how they morphed into other things. So for example, when we began with Harvest, obviously we were looking at, like farming simulators and like Harvest Moon and this kind of thing and looking at what we could do. And then it ended up very different. But like, that's kind of where we started. And then when we started with Delve, weirdly enough, the first beginning was, okay, how can we do Minecraft? We need to do Minecraft.
Really?
We need to find a way. What is that going to look like? And then it morphed into something that ended up being completely different than that. And like
Bro, imagine what we could have had with that. That's crazy.
But I mean, more recently as well, when we're looking at, okay, so, okay, here is a random feature that Path of Exile 2 will have that's not in the game right now, but we're blatantly stealing, which is that, so I've always been stringently against damage numbers. In video games. I just don't. I mean, I know there are people who love damage numbers, and that's like a huge thing. That like there's I've always been in the opinion that they break the immersion, and that's all you end up looking at, and so I don't really love them.
And
the other day someone was like, can we do damage numbers like Elden Ring? I'm like, what?
Huh?
Elden Ring has damage numbers? What are you talking about? And then like, yeah, the damage numbers in Elden
whenever
Ring.
you hit a mob or hit a boss,
and then they showed me a
shows
video.
up on the health bar next to it.
So there's a little number that appears at the top right of health bars that are the damage numbers. And I'm like, my goodness. This is a way to... I didn't even notice that was there. This is a way that we can do damage numbers.
How is that going to work?
That isn't going to break any of the problems we have. So I'm just gonna shamelessly rip that off. Path of Exile 2 will have damage numbers just like they are in Elden Ring.
The interview's worth it. We got information. Everyone in the chat right now, we've got information. This is
Yeah,
good.
so we absolutely do that. Yeah. So that is one of those things that
Elaborate.
It's finally a way, and that is just a blatant like theft, right? It's just a straight up UI design. I never would have thought of it. It is something that they had, and it perfectly fits the that thing. So there you go.
We've learned
that
one
is the
thing.
thing.
I've done my job.
Yep.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Everyone in the chat right now, there you go. We've got it. We've got more questions. We're going to go through them, but I'm glad that we finally got confirmation. Personally, I'm a big fan of damage numbers. I enjoy playing Vampire Survivors because it makes my brain happy to see numbers pop up.
Yeah. But we're talking about Vampire Survivors. It's like you focus on the damage numbers because the actual action is like
The damage numbers.
You stand there, things happen. So I'm guessing that you also, when you were playing either Elden Ring or Dark Souls, you kind of went, this dodge roll. That's pretty
Yeah,
nifty.
a lot of their shit did come from Elden
Is
Ring.
that how dodge rolling is gonna go?
It wasn't just that. I mean, it's not like that's the only game with dodge roll. Like the discussion for that
Isn't it?
honestly was, okay, we want to be an action game. Action games have dodge rolls. Like almost every good action game you can think of has a dodge roll. Why don't we? You know what I mean? Like we really should have this. And the same was true of active blocking.
Because it
as
makes
well,
no
by the way.
fucking sense,
like,
but
I like active blocking, so I'm a big fan of Terror before it died.
Well, yeah.
And there was a class there, the Lancer class, I believe, where you could block with his shield for like 3 seconds, but during the first second of block, it was way more effective, rewarding active play. Are you saying that there's going to be something like that?
There are absolutely things like that. So we've showed active block. What we haven't shown is more of the other stuff that will probably come in later on around this. So I can't announce any of that, but there will be more. And really it just comes down to, okay, we want to be an action game. What do action games have? We really should look and seriously consider, like all of those things. I mean, so like another example with that, with the blocking as well, is that it's very, very common in any kind of action game, the games these days to have some kind of indicator for an unblockable attack, like this kind of red flash type thing you get in games. Absolutely. Like it took a while to convince people that we should have something like that, but we have added it now. It's something that's in the game. So things like that, more of those just action game mechanics are things that you need to do if you want to be taken seriously as an action game. So that's the
I
reason why
quite
we
like indicators for unblockable attacks because, again, it's rewarding the player for paying attention to the game and then taking the correct action within the game, even if the indicator isn't necessarily a big red circle on the ground, but is the enemy model pulling back a massive hammer for a smash onto the ground, and you're thinking, yep, when he pulls the hammer back, roll out the way because I can't block that. So any kind of visual...
I really don't know how this is going to work.
Cue
It's just, we got to play it to feel it.
You should consider not being here right now. I'm okay with that. It's quite cool.
It's kind of interesting though because there
What was it, was it the Marksman release, or was it the last, it was the Marksman and the Ranger release. It was, they were like never ever dodge rolling. They didn't dodge roll until like, I think the Marksman dodge rolled once in the boss fight. Did the Ranger ever dodge roll? She only did her like a backflip stuff, right? I don't know if it's gonna get used at all, or if it's just gonna be
there was a weird one that came
bluff.
up recently where who was it? That's right, it was someone from Tencent actually who was playing the game, and they fought against the second boss, the Devourer, and they said it was they died to it. And now, what I expect now that so we've got checkpoints in the game now. We didn't before, so when you die to the boss, you just respawn right in front of it. You just play it again very quickly.
Okay.
And the expectation when you die, for me, is that you try again, and maybe 2 more times, and then you beat it, right? Because your skills improve.
If he says this guy gave up,
It's
I'm
repetition. It's very similar
gonna
to
be
Elden Ring.
really
Again, the
depressed.
Respawn point is almost right outside the boss because the challenge, the fun bit of the game, is the boss, not getting to the boss.
Right. But this
Wow.
person's expectation
Fucker.
was, I die to the boss, so therefore I'm going to go grind some more monsters to get more powerful equipment, rather than just
very
play
acceptable,
the boss.
very acceptable.
And this was actually an interesting moment.
That is a MMO RPG player right there. That is a, I died, let's go grind. I need to go grind. We need 7,000 more goblin ears so I can trade them in. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it.
For me, because I
God damn
hadn't
it.
considered the fact that that could be a valid reaction that a player could have to that situation. And then
I'm using the
their
hotkey, but I also
argument
keep
was,
clicking it,
okay,
so
like,
they just
are you a
double
loot game or are you an action game? And I was kind of like, well, we're both. But they said, well, if you're a loot game, then you should be able to just go and grind some loot and then use that as a way to get past a boss rather than having to get good at action. And that was their view of that. And I don't know if I fully agree with this, because to me, I feel like you need to have some level of technical skill, you might call it, of dodging and doing this kind of stuff to be able to defeat a boss, like learning the mechanics a little bit and so on. But the question is, to what extent do we embrace that? And so the question is, for the second boss of the game, should a player be able to just go grind some monsters for a while?
If the player is able to do that and it's the second boss of the game, you're effectively teaching the player that they can trivialize all the mechanics of the game by simply having a
Correct,
bigger number
correct.
than the game wants you to have.
Correct,
Mhm.
which is a bit of a tricky one. So yeah, I'm actually not sure what entirely to do about that, because as I said, it's not an expectation that I realize someone would have that early in the game. Like there presumably will be points where if you could be undergeared to the point where
I really like
where it's very difficult
doing
to
that
beat
in
a boss.
games,
On the
but I don't
other
know if
hand,
that's right for PoE.
someone like Mark can beat a boss with extremely bad gear because he understands all the mechanics flawlessly to the point where he can dodge practically everything, and it's just a question of how long it takes to do damage after that point. So there are things like that can happen, but yeah, I don't know. Like it's kind of an interesting one. But I guess what I would say that I end up with there is that I do believe that some amount of technical skill, sort of action game skill, as it were, should be required to get through the game for the most part, and that is an important element to me. So that's where I am with that.
The chat's general reaction seems to be that we should balance the game around Mark. That's what it should be. It should be, if Mark is struggling, that's fine. If Mark is able to do it, that's probably the kind of difficulty it should be at. Personally,
Which
I'm
Mark?
very much of the opinion that that Tencent guy sounds like a skill issue, sounds like they should just get better at the game. But unfortunately, there is that kind of mindset of, I have struggled at this, therefore the problem must be with the numbers of my character, the gear, the stats, not in
That
any way
is
me. And it's difficult to kind of self-reflect on.
that's a man. I, I don't know what they do about that, because that's taught to you by other games. It's what I was scared with the last Epoch when I was in that last boss fight and I didn't realize that it was regenning. I was like, oh, there's nothing I could do to win this fight. It's just I don't have the damage to kill him. And that's kind of what you're taught in MMOs generally. All my knowledge is MapleStory, and I'm like, the fight just the longer fights go, harder they get, because you can't mess up that many times, and the more like potions you're burning, currency you're burning. PoE isn't like that though. I don't know. Interesting. I don't know. I did the thing again.
On that. From a YouTube point of view, because mostly I just make YouTube videos,
Oh.
I can guarantee that somebody will watch Path of Exile 2 beaten on lowest possible gear,
Why does
lowest
this keep happening? I don't know why that keeps
possible
happening.
numbers, lowest possible damage, lowest possible health. Very few people are going to watch Path of Exile beaten by being massively overpowered and just...
Was it
slap
Tide
right through all the
23's
bosses. I mean,
beating
that's-
Well, you say
Uber
that,
Elder
and
or
yet,
Elder
if you
at
look
like
all
level
the
20?
top, Twitch streams right
I mean,
now.
oh yeah, they're
Path of
incredibly
Exile
powerful.
1.
They're just righteous fire and standing there and doing all that cool stuff, which will happen.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's always difficult. It's always interesting to see people beat a puzzle, effectively giving themselves a stat-based handicap of saying, I'm going to do this with lowest possible numbers. But the idea of just going away, grinding, getting more powerful, and going back to the boss, I just like throwing myself against the boss again and again and again until I eventually win.
Right.
Well, that, of course, is something you.
I love that in Elden Ring, because it's
Let's go on to the next
possible.
question. Oh, sorry, carry on.
Sorry, but there was just one thing that I was wondering.
It's the reason I really like that in like Elden Ring and stuff, and I think not in I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it in PoE, but in other games in general, because I know that it's possible. I know that in Elden Ring or Dark Souls, you can be level 1 naked with your fists and beat every boss in the game and do everything without being hit. There's hitless runs. I don't think that's possible. I mean, as far as we've seen, it's not really possible in PoE 1. No, it is impossible to some extent because you can't just have no weapons or even white weapons with white like level 1 skill gems. You would never kill the boss. It would take days with billions of HP. Um so I think that's why it can't exist in PoE 1. You have to be able to outgear stuff to some extent because there is a damage threshold. There is a, a tank threshold of if you have 1 HP in like a in eater, let's say, you'll die instantly when he gets to the circle phase because he puts the beam directly on you, and if it touches you, you die because it would deal 1 damage. So that's a fight where you have to have some amount of HP. You have to have some amount. Or to counteract it, you would have to have 1 HP with infinite damage to instantly kill him. So that would be overgearing in the other direction. So the question is whether you have it or not. The question is, where's that line? Where's a good line? And is it the Quinn strat, tank the Maven memory game? Just be able to just tank it, or should there like be damage checks and one shots? Like I died to Eater to a one shot. That character was so tanky. I jumped into a fucking drowning orb. Oh. Anyways,
Wondering about
Yeah.
when I was thinking about this, which was like, is there a difference in culture between China and the West with
Yes,
regard to
hugely,
this issue?
massively.
I wonder if that can be one of the reasons why that was a different reaction there.
Well, as soon as you said
Different
that
types of
Tencent guy
games.
failed
Yeah.
to beat the boss, I
Or
just imagined
more
him
common
straight
type
away
of
taking
games.
the credit card out and being like, right, where's the better armor? Where's the better
Still feel a
weapons?
little bit of-
Where can I get health potions? Can I just skip this? Why can't I just pay to win? That kind of
Right.
stuff. And then when you said no, you've got to play the game.
I don't think it's
you're
even
like,
that.
Oh, right. Okay, I don't get that.
Right. Anyway, you were saying.
Don't worry.
He can't comment on that, but I don't think. But I don't think it's that. I don't think it's the pay to win or buying it. I think it's so common that like those types of games where they're grinding games. Yeah, just so many different MMOs and stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other examples besides MapleStory 1 and 2. I can't. The only ones I've played so far is that, and I've played Classic recently. Before that would have been Blade and Soul. What's the last grinding MMO game that I've played? It's probably an app. There was a MMO on my tablet that I can't remember the name of it. But I was just farming sticks to sell sticks to get gold to buy gear. Yeah. I wonder if that's
Worry, it's
the
okay.
thing.
I'm sure they'll be okay with this. Everyone in the chat's like, oh, he went there. It's okay, don't worry, they'll be fine with this. Let's go on to the next question. We're
They
speaking
won't.
about casual versus hardcore design.
Be pissed.
Question 5. This is more for you to just speak about what you want to speak about. What have you wanted to talk about, but no one has yet asked the right question?
This is honestly one of the hardest questions you can ever get in an interview because it's like you're giving someone zero, like things to latch any thoughts onto.
Yes.
So what I will do therefore is take that and run with it. Okay, right. So what I'm going to talk about is that exact phenomenon. Why do we have classes at all? This is one of these things where, like, when we originally designed Path of Exile 1, we actually wanted to have a classless system. I was actually very inspired by Dungeon Siege 1. That's another game that
Good game.
I cared a lot about. I played a lot of when I was younger. And that game actually didn't have classes. They just had skills that you got better at by using them again and again. And the problem that
Dark
you run
Souls.
into, in my opinion, with that kind of stuff is that you don't have any thought to latch your idea of how to design a character on. If you show someone a ranger, they're like, I immediately know what kind of thing I want to do with that. I've got ideas of how I might want to take that and so on. So like giving people stereotypes to latch onto is actually a super important thing in game design in general to inspire their creativity. You need to start from a point. So that's actually something that I think is super important, and something that, like, once again, the reason we have all these classes, even though our actual philosophy is around the ability to be free to choose whatever skill you want on it, like, like we actually, as a technical matter, do allow you to use or you can, the passive tree is all unified, so you can go all around it in different places. The skills can be used anywhere. The items obviously just require requirements, but you can get those. Like in general, we try to be very open. So really, the classes are not actually doing very much at all at the beginning of the game.
Starting point, that's really it, an ascendancy.
Choices slightly. So yeah, really, the main purpose of a class is to be a stereotype, to give you something to think about as you design your character. And most people will just latch onto that stereotype and run with it. And that kind of means that they've got that way. So yeah, that's kind of
Like, getting my friends to play, the hardest thing explaining to them was like, your character doesn't really matter. Like, it'll put you in the ballpark, but you can do anything. You could be a ranger that's a melee character, and then you'd be a raider, right? But then it's too much to go into. But yeah, yeah.
reason why we do
I think it's just
That's
for
actually,
new players.
because I come from a theatre background and then mostly into an acting background, there's a thing called
Wow.
Jungian archetypes.
No one had any
and
clue.
It's very, very similar. The idea that you're almost shortcutting what the audience already know with characters that you make. So the Jungian archetypes would be the mentor character within a story is normally a wizened old man with a beard. That's why you look at Gandalf. That's why you look at Dumbledore. That's why you look at Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then you'd say that actually the plucky young hero has to reject the call to adventure, then something bad happens in their own life, then they get brought into it. That would be your Luke Skywalkers, that would be your Frodos. And then the evil guy is normally a big, powerful warlord clad in black armor. That's why you've got Sauron, that's why you've got Darth Vader. That's why you've got Voldemort. We're using Jungian archetypes when writing a story to effectively shortcut the audience's
I never really
knowledge,
thought about Voldemort
using
like
their
that.
kind of
I can see
preconceived
his, huh?
expectations of who they expect to be good and who they expect to be bad, to effectively tell a story in a very surface level way, and then you can get deeper into it. So when you're saying this class is this and this class is that, you're effectively saying to the audience, this person is going to fit this role within your adventure, build into that straight away. Someone in the chat gave a great point that classes were potentially a holdover from the early Dungeons and Dragons adventures, or the early kind of tabletop adventures, where
Essentially.
your class was able to do a certain thing
where a lot of it
within
came
a
from.
party and was one part of a whole, and the whole was stronger because
It was like
everyone
orcs
was
didn't
able to
exist
do
or
the
anything,
part
right?
specifically.
Before them?
There's actually, this is going to jump to a question later, but we may as well shortcut to it now. I think one of the holdovers from Dungeons & Dragons is the identifying items system. And that is because identifying items, or knowing what an item is before you put it on,
I have
is
very
only
big
really
opinions on
relevant
this.
if you can put on an unidentified item, and it might be cursed. Because that way you're actually giving the player a benefit to identifying before putting it on. You're removing
Okay. No, let him
that
finish.
risk of something negative happening. In Path of Exile 1, there is
Or
nothing
Jonathan
negative
goes,
that
though.
happens because you just can't put on the unidentified stuff. I see that as an almost superfluous system. It's a system that is, if you were to remove it, yes, you'd have to remove the identifying scrolls and rejig some of the economy, but it wouldn't necessarily change the gameplay a huge amount because people identify rare items
Item
based
filters.
on the graphic of the item. They almost know what
You'd
it
be able to
is
filter out
as soon as
mods.
they get it. Are there other systems that you have seen and you have looked at and maybe you've reconsidered and said, you know what, this is actually just bogging the game down. We don't need this anymore. And what are those?
Okay. I need to talk about this. I love unidentified items in Dungeons & Dragons. I was a DM for a while. I played in a bunch of campaigns over the years, since like high school. I hate the identify spell. I hate how easy it is to identify items. It was... I didn't realize this until I watched Koibu Go watch this campaign if you like Dungeons and Dragons at all. Oh, it's such a good Heroes. Fuck, what's it called? Heroes. Hardcore Heroes. I think that's where it was, and they were trying to figure out what their items did because they didn't have identify by just using them, and they're like, oh, I hit this thing. Um, I know that like hitting my, my uh, fellow adventurer, I need a 16, and I rolled a 15, but I still hit. Okay, I know this has a +1 on it, then, or at least. And doing that through repetition and other things, you can figure out like what items do. I was like, that's so fucking funny. It's so tedious, but it's so interesting. And the curse thing too is really interesting. Like I've made cursed items before, um, and having cursed items identifies just like, oh, identify it's cursed. Oh, I don't. It's kind of, what the hell does that do? Um, So I was like, so I was just like, fuck it. They don't know this shit's cursed. They identified it. I'm not telling them it's cursed. Um, but it's yeah. Um, Another campaign. This is a different campaign. This was like my old group of friends that I used to play with. I gave them unique items that really early on. This is like level 3 or 4. That it was a amorphous blob, and they had to figure out what it was, and they were taking like psychic damage, um, until they could, while they were like couldn't figure it out, um, and I don't know, it kind of like morphed to what they wanted it to be under certain parameters, but the thing was to figure out what the parameters were. Um, and I really, really like that. I really like the hidden. You can't just know everything. It's why I hate wikis in games, and I hate outside sources. I like figuring it out for yourself and stuff like that. Not just like, oh, I looked at the wiki, I know everything about the skill, I know all its damage, I know everything that it could do, I know everything it links with, I know every weapon that has everything that could use and everything with it. I know that the damage tier of it. I know how this rates with other skills because and how many people play it, because there's like PoE Ninja, and it like shows all like the most popular skills, and like this one's the most popular, so it also probably does the most damage, and all the streamers are making builds for. I fucking if I could ever make a video game, if I ever make a video game, I need a lobby some politicians to make it illegal to have wikis or publish videos on the content for the sole purpose of the people have to figure it out themselves or like share info in game with each other. Um, and then it would make like info like a currency. So like, but then you'd have like RTM, you'd have to RMT, you'd have to deal with. But it would be so cool, like paying like guilds or paying something like this guild like finds out stuff and you pay them for information on stuff. Oh, it'd be so cool. Ah, super long tangent on this, but yeah.
Those systems.
Well, I do feel like I need to defend identifying items for just a second.
Oh,
here.
go on then.
Because
Cold oil.
okay, admittedly, the original reason for item identification would be the thing you said with the cursed items, I assume. But the reason in an action RPG that you have identifying items up to this point really is just that you get to double dip the dopamine of like, okay, something dropped. Oh, hang on a second, what's it going to be? And then you get another moment of what's it going to be, right? That really is that. It really comes
I
down
thought
to
the
that.
main reason was going to be
And it would be
the
very
loot
easy to
filter.
say that, oh, well, what's really the value of that? You could just remove that and it would be fine and items would still be good. But it is actually hard for me to necessarily say that they would be as good as they are now. Like there is actually some little bit of value of that. And the other thing is that there's also in game design the concept of the near miss. So when you identify an item, you get the ability to have a near miss, which also, as it turns out, feels good to people. Like I saw the mods. I realized that I could like 2 of the mods were good, but I just needed that 3rd one. I was so close, right? You know what I mean? Like that's like a thing that kind of
This
adds
doesn't hit, does it?
to the joy of identification.
Hmm.
Even though it may feel frustrating when you're actually doing it, it is like part of that feeling. And it's actually hard to make that happen at the point where the item drops from the monster. You're kind of too involved in the combat still at that point to really appreciate that particular issue. So that's like sort of like part of the thing. So effectively, you get to split apart that like I'm an item thinking about item mode from the kind of like combat mode part. Now, one thing that I would say is that the identification scroll thing in PoE1 is probably not that useful, which is why in PoE2 we made it so that you can, there's an NPC in town who'll just ID all the items in your inventory. You just click that and it IDs everything. And then we're going to make ID scrolls much rarer because you don't really need very many of them anymore. Like you just use them to ID something that you really care about on the field. So that's kind of where we went with that. So there is some elements of that. But the other thing as well is that we would have, I will mention, if we did have everything dropping ID'd, which would be that we would actually be completely removing the ability to have that experience of identifying and finding something, because item filters would allow you to just only be highlighting the items that exactly fit the description that you were looking for, which means that you would actually then at that point just have like everything that drops is good and everything that doesn't drop is bad, and you're just collecting, like you're just clicking on like there's no like moment of like, is this good or is this bad? It's just like anything that's on the ground, you just pick it up.
The
I don't know that
leather
I love
belts
that
and
either.
stuff, like headhunters
Like
and
there's
stuff.
certainly like
I'd be like,
certainly
oh,
I'm
is
not
this a
gonna say
headhunter?
that item filters are bad, because I was literally the person who proposed and implemented them in the first place. But the thing that though is that I do think you want some room for the ability to like have pick up a rare and then ID it, and then it might be good or it might be bad. And I want that's still an experience I want to deliver. And so in PoE2, we're improving the ability for that to happen. Like in PoE1, the average rare on the ground is just garbage, and there's no point in even identifying it by the time you get to endgame. That's something that I want to fix, because I still like that experience of identifying an item and it might be good and it might be bad. So yeah, that's my defense of identification for you there.
That was great. No, and everyone's really happy that there'll be a character in town that's able to identify the items for you.
Right.
He needs to be in your hideout.
We're kind of asking these questions to delve in and maybe get little tidbits of information that you haven't told other people. That's my plan. I'm going to be very
He's never, ever,
about that.
ever,
I'm
ever,
trying to get you to
ever,
admit
ever
to
getting
things
used.
that
He's in town.
maybe you haven't told
Not in
anyone
the
else.
hideout.
We'll try and trick you up. That's the honest, genuine plan. So if you have a question in chat that you would like to ask Jonathan, the game director of Path of Exile 2, if you think we can be a little bit sneaky with it and find a way to ask him questions that's going to make him reveal information about the game, let's just do that. That's exactly what we're going to do. So we've talked about things that you've wanted to talk about. Let's move on to the next question. Question 6. This is
something you don't want to talk about.
I think we've touched on this earlier, but what is your favorite video game from a mechanical standpoint, and why?
So, as I say, if I look at things like, okay, what are the games that I traditionally if you, like my first reaction, the emotional reaction, as it were, to that question is definitely the games that I played when I was a kid. You know, things like Half-Life and StarCraft and things like that, and they were just, and Final Fantasy, those things were just great.
Oh, Final Fantasy's
But if
good
I look
too.
at things recently, I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about honing your sense for just what, like for jank. I find myself more drawn today to things, the experiences that are just extremely polished and don't have any of that going on. And 2 games that I really loved recently. Sorry to do the whole chicken out thing and pick multiple games, but 2 games that I really enjoyed. One of them was the God of War, not the most recent one, but the one before that, the reboot of God of War when they first added the axe.
Oh,
like
Dad of Boy, that one.
Yeah, Dad of War. Yeah. That game to me.
Do you think it had anything to do with him becoming a father?
And I didn't run into any jank at all. I kind of had a very, very good experience all the way through it. It had very few characters, which I thought was like, there's that sort of old saying about things being perfect with nothing left to remove, like that kind of stuff. Like,
I guess it was the second God of War that it really had
a reduction in characters.
lot.
It was still a long game, but like they did a lot with little. And you know, that game was really excellent. I am a big fan of that particular title. The next one they made, I think, was very good, but I wouldn't put it quite at the same level as the first one of those two. And another one that I really love for similar reasons is Ori and the Blind Forest and Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Both of those games, once again, very tight, no jank. Scary that the next game they're making is in our genre.
Yeah, it is,
because,
huh?
The chat is very much agreeing with you on this one. The God of War got some pushback, don't get me wrong.
Yes,
but
I
as
know, I know.
soon
Not
as
They
you-
everyone-
probably got
not
pushback on the
everyone
other, the newer one.
Yeah, not everyone loved that game because I think that like there were things that I think were weak as far as things like how the item system was and so on. It was weak, but also it wasn't bad. And as I said, I think that that's a thing that I care a lot about. Like there wasn't anything bad that happened. So yeah, and then as I said, the actual gameplay stuff was very tight. But yes, Ori, that game, very, very tight. Like there might have been bugs in that game. I certainly didn't encounter
Hollow
any. There
Knight.
might have been jank in that game. I certainly
Yeah.
didn't find any. Like the feel of moving around and all that stuff, very, very excellent. Like, you know, I would honestly strive to have the feeling of movement and gameplay to be as good as a game like that. So I'm very keen to try out No Rest for the Wicked and see what they've got going on with
That's
that.
their new one, right? That's
And, that's
that could
very
be
interesting
interesting.
to me.
When does that
because,
come
yeah, as I
out?
said, the previous two games they've made have been just very polished. And I actually don't think you see that many AAA games in recent times of that don't have jank in them. It's actually relatively rare.
We're
these days.
releasing our seventh
And that's kind of concerning.
pre-alpha.
I can only hope to live up to that level of quality for PoE2. I'm certainly hoping that we're able to get to that point because yeah, I really hate that stuff whenever you get any sort of jank, and yeah, it just gets.
Last Epoch had some jank.
For
I mean,
whatever
games
reason.
we've gone from AAA, we've had
It's not really a game thing, but my in-between game that I've started playing is RimWorld. And I feel like the RimWorld has like a little bit of jank to it, just base. But it's all the mods that you add to it that work so fucking jank together. Like I had Combat Evolved on, and randomly I could no longer draft my pawns because the mod. Yeah, it wasn't updated for 1.5 and stuff, but it was working. Everything else about it was working. I couldn't draft. I don't.
quadruple A. I think CD Projekt Red have now announced a quadruple A. So
Right.
Path of Exile 2 first 6A
Witcher,
game
right? The next
coming
Witcher.
out. Can we confirm that, Jonathan?
Sure, why not?
Yes, brilliant.
We'll
It's
do as many
confirmed.
A's as you feel like. But at the end of the day, I just don't want any jank. That's what I want. Certainly, we have more content.
I'm so
in
appreciative for
PoE2
PoE
than
because it
most games.
doesn't
Like,
have
like
that jank.
brutally overscoped.
It really
It's
doesn't.
actually absurd how many monsters got made. While it's actually crazy. Like I've told people numbers of like how many monsters and bosses and stuff there are, but it's just like it's actually ridiculous. Like
You've got to give us
feel like
numbers
we're-
now,
we're
Jonathan.
actually-
I mean, you're making
we're
the first sextuple A game. We need to know
Yeah,
how
yeah.
many monsters are going to be in this game.
Yeah. So. It's actually scary
Careful.
the degree to which, like, when I actually look at how long this game is in development.
Don't tell us
how
too
long
high
was
of a
Nukem
number.
Forever in development
We're gonna
for?
start counting on you.
That was
Actually,
about
when you-
15, 20 years or something like that. Like a
Really? That
ridiculous.
long? Okay.
I think when they announced it and then when they finally released it, there was a ridiculous 17 years. Someone I think is saying an absolute
17 years,
ridiculous
okay, right.
amount of time.
Right,
For
so we're
what?
not quite there yet. Look at how long this game is in development. Like, how long was Duke Nukem Forever in development for?
That
Duke
was about
Nukem?
15, 20 years or something like that. Like a
Really? That
ridiculous.
long? Okay.
I think when they announced it and then when they finally released it, there was a ridiculous 17 years. Someone I think is saying an absolute
17 years, okay,
ridiculous
right.
amount of time.
Right, so we're not quite there yet. But I'm pretty sure the beginnings of what we started was in 2017. We're in 2000 and
what I was talking about earlier. I wonder how much of that time
To
was
be fair,
wasted.
2020 lasted
Like, was
about 5
2017
years.
useful
It
at
was
all?
very strange.
Yeah,
That
sure,
whole
sure.
kind of era was at least 10 years long, despite only lasting 2 years.
Because yeah, it's been going on, and like the amount of content that has gotten made in that time is just absolutely ridiculous. And it's even to the point, like there's funny things like so the league.
See if he mentions it. If not, I'll talk about it.
Crap, I'm terrible with names, even for the leagues we just released. The Forest one, what the hell was it called again?
Just
the
describe
Wildwood,
it. Everyone, someone in chat will tell me what happened.
Yeah, the Wildwood one.
Affliction.
bloody hell. Yes. Anyway, the funny thing about that is that the assets used in Affliction are actually assets that were made for PoE2 6 years ago, and then became too old to be in PoE2 anymore, and then we remade them, and then we used the ones we made for PoE2 and PoE1. That is like
They've said that before, but I didn't realize they were
concerning-
6-year-old.
So Path of Exile
stuff.
1 was made. You guys wanted to redo a lot of it, so you redid loads of it. Then you realized that you weren't able to
Oh.
integrate this with Path of Exile 1, so it effectively became Path of Exile 2. And now you're taking the stuff that was originally made for Path of Exile 2 and going, well, this is no good anymore. Just throw it over the Path of Exile 1. We'll use it there. Fantastic.
It sounds worse when you say it that way.
It does sound a lot worse than I say it that way. That's why I said it that way. But we all love you, and we all genuinely do want to support this game and see how it's going on. Quick question in the chat. WASD movement. That's confirmed, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes! Okay, cool.
Yes.
Right, so your favorite video game. You mentioned God of War about the fact that it managed to remove a lot of superfluous systems. Let's just pull on that thread. What systems have you removed from Path of Exile 2? Either bringing them over from 1, or you spent time developing them and then had a bit of self-reflection and said, you know what, this doesn't need to be here. Because if God of War, the reboot, was so good because it removed
I want to
all the
know
superfluous
something
stuff.
that they've added and
Give us
then
an
took
example of
out.
when
I
you've
want to
done
know. That's an interesting question.
It's very hard to exactly come up with something that is a nice tight package to say that for, because it's kind of, it really is like an evolution that continues along.
I want to pick that item up.
But,
Please
I mean,
go away.
So there's a lot of stuff we haven't brought over yet, and that doesn't really count yet, I guess.
No, that
because,
doesn't count.
It doesn't quite meet the definition of removing again like that, but
Adding and removing. There has to be something.
Yeah, I'm asking the
It's like
hard
what it really-
questions
it's
here,
what
I
it-
know that.
it is hard.
Well, Jonathan thinks one thing that from the last question I almost forgot. Because it's taking a lot of time to, and they decided to make a separate expansion. The R team, I forget his name. Sorry, forgot your name. R team guy, Hoodie Boy, or Beanie Boy. I don't remember his name. From XLCon. He was talking about, like, I mean, he basically finished everything they asked him for, so he just started making more and more and more. So there's like this giant inventory of items and art and everything that he's just stockpiling for them to use it when they get to it. I wonder how often that ever happens in any other game, where he's just has so much time and freedom to just make as much stuff as he wants, because he's met probably not all, there's things that come up that they need specifically made, obviously all that, but I wonder how much of him is just like, well, throw it in PoE1. We've got nowhere else to do it. It's just this infinite vault of stuff. Not infinite and stuff, you know what I mean, but yeah.
Because what it really is that when we're
I watched the
redesigning
XLCon
individual
interviews. They're
things,
very,
like,
very interesting. The music and art one,
we only make again the stuff
and
that
the
makes sense, if you know what I mean. So it doesn't really feel
lighting
like
system and
removal
all
when
that
we're doing
one's
it.
super
There's a lot
cool.
of
The
complexity
engine.
that we've tried to remove from the base systems. But like it's the reason, part of the reason why I struggle to come up with examples there is because they would feel so arcane that I don't know that that even be appreciable. Like the way Leech works, for example, where it's like the way that Leech works is some ungodly, inhuman formula that not anyone on Earth understands in PoE1. And in PoE2, the way that it works is just the percentage that you see on the... like, you just get a percentage on your item and well, it works like how D2 worked, except for that monsters have leech resist that scales up through the game, which means that it still kind of works. It doesn't quite do exactly what it says on the tin, but it is just way simpler, right? Like, it says 5% of damage. At level 1, it will be 5% of damage, and then as you go through the game, monsters get resistance to that leech, which means that, you know, like...
As long as they don't get
So
immunity.
you'll still do
fine.
effectively the same damage to them, but the percentage of that damage that
Yeah,
you
that you get.
leech
So,
will
like-
be reduced by a certain amount based on that monster's resistance.
That's an example of just like, it's a simplification, but it doesn't really feel like a removal in the same way. We just did some stuff, but then when I look at what it was that was there, it feels like a big deal to us, because it's like, you know, there was just some horrible thing that was like had 20 freaking hacks piled on top of each other in order to achieve various results that mattered at various points.
I'm
so
sure
yeah, that's
Mark
probably a very
understands it. Mark knows how
You need to open the POV of this.
Yeah, no,
I
he
don't
does.
know
He
exactly
does.
where
I
to
don't think
Mark
he
put
knows.
stuff.
understands it. If ever
Yeah.
we're unsure of something, we'll just go to Mark. Anyone in the chat that's just joining us, Mark is apparently some kind of deity. That was, we refer to him as what, Mark 1, as he was the first Mark
Yes,
that
Mark
was working the
yes.
company, and he understands literally every single system.
Well, he's the one who answers all of the questions on Reddit about how
Fantastic,
specific
okay.
skills work. So,
I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I wouldn't wish being on Reddit or interacting with that with anyone. So Mark is definitely doing us an absolute solid by sorting that out.
Right.
Thank you to Mark. Let's go on to question 7. It's just kind of actually, this very much links back to what we were just saying. Is there anything major that has changed from the inception of the idea for Path of Exile 2 to now? Was there anything that the whole team, whether it was yourself or the rest of the team, you were super on board with the idea, or you were super against it, and then over the years you
WASD.
actually said, you know what, we either should or shouldn't do this?
So
WSD is a
in
cop out.
some
You already
ways,
mentioned it. You
nothing
pick
has
something
changed,
else.
because the overall design goal is the same, like, which on a high level is just make a perfect action RPG. And I guess then the definition of that shifts over time slightly, which changes things. But ultimately, the design goal was, you know, like we want to have everything that was good from PoE 1 and nothing that was bad, and have the combat be great. So that is still the same, but I guess it's in the specific details it's sort of harder to even appreciate, because there's this phenomenon you get where, like, the moment that we try something and it's good, then that was always what I wanted to do. But if it's the other, if I try
The
something
evolution
and then
of
it feels
it.
bad, then I'm like, well, that just wasn't good ever. So we should try that. We should do something else. And so it's very hard when your mind thinks that way to be able to even identify something that changed in some sense. But certainly things like WASD.
Ah, it's a
was
cop
something
out. You
that
can't
I
say that.
expected would be not good, and ended up.
You've already
being
mentioned it.
extremely Good.
Fuck.
And the actual
Knew
reason
he was
why I
gonna
thought
say
that
that.
would be bad, by the way, was because there was another game that did it in an action RPG that I believe is now dead. I think it was called Pagan Online, which nobody ever heard of. It was like a game that went into beta and failed.
Wasn't that a
kind of just disappeared?
MOBA?
And that game, one of the things that they advertised even
Wasn't that
was
like Smite?
WSD movement. And at the time, I kind of thought, oh, that's kind of dumb. Like, why would you want to do that in an action RPG? You know, like, it didn't seem important to me. When I tried
Name
it, in the
doesn't
game, it also felt bad.
Sound familiar.
And so it took some overcoming of that, because I thought that I knew that was bad already. So it took some overcoming to get to the point where I was like, okay, I'm willing to give this a shot, and maybe the issue was just that game and not the control scheme. Because then once we did it with some of the other stuff that we did to make Melee better in PoE 2, that is, it was very good. Like, even right from the very first moment that we tried it. Yeah, that is something that probably is a good example of something that really did surprise me as far as how it went. But also was something that a lot of people on the team were very skeptical about, and mostly because they were very worried about the idea that people who played with one control scheme versus another would get an advantage over one another, which is something that feels like it's important, but actually I believe isn't. Yeah, and certainly
It's
if we had
kind of like in a
moved to that,
shooter,
if we had
mouse
just
and
gone with
keyboard
the
versus
assumption that
controller.
people playing WSD have an advantage.
Just one
that
is
it
always
become
going to be
good,
better than the
then
other.
We wouldn't have discovered all the awesomeness that
Does
we
that
then
take
did,
anything away from it?
which
In
turns out
tournaments, it does.
somewhat applies back to mouse to move as well. Yeah,
Single
that
player,
thing was,
no.
that was a big one, I think, and
What the
it
fuck is
was
this?
especially painful because once we did it, there was a huge amount that had to change in the game to make it work, as far as like existing skill design that we thought we'd done, and all sorts of other stuff like that. Like, we had to go back and change a bunch of skills, like you know, like it's even still happening now. There's like tons of skills that are getting revisited and moving while doing them, being added, and like tweaks being done to make it feel good. Because once you've felt that good feeling with one skill, it's very hard to then use another skill that doesn't have that. Yeah, that's requiring like a huge amount of work. But yeah, that's probably one of the big ones, I would say.
Okay, that's a great answer. Let's go straight on to question 8, which is a very important question. Path of Exile 1 hates melee classes. Why?
Well,
I know we touched on this earlier with the fact that everyone they were all built with different rigs, but the amount of, because I use the kind of melee, the meta build websites, and it's always range stuff, magic stuff, totem stuff. It is difficult to play the game when you need to get close to the boss, and the boss has a massive amount of things to either prevent you getting close to them or AoE. How are you going to get melee works?
I've got about 5 answers to this question.
Go for it, man. I'll have all 5.
Yep. So one of them is the rig thing. It is just harder for us to make melee skills than not melee skills, because melee skills require animating rigs that the animators literally hate. Like, they are like, do not make me make an animation on this dumb old rig. Like, they're actually like that. Like, it really is. Like, they do not want to do it, and they are awful compared to modern rigs in like a ton of ways. They're just very hard to use. So not only do they take 10 times longer to make an animation on them, but then you have to make 7 more copies of it for every class.
Oh my god.
Every class in Path of Exile 1 has a different rig for the character model, which effectively increases the amount of work you need to do by 7. Because if you were to make
rigging models is not
one rig doing
fun.
it wouldn't be able to be immediately copied and transferred to all the others.
I had a project where I was,
which was one of the reasons that Path of Exile
I made a werewolf.
We're gonna.
I thought I'd be so cool and like rig everything.
How would Path of Exile 2 do it slightly differently, or again, are the characters all
make
multiple
pieces to his model, which
for all humanoid characters,
teeth that could like fall out.
And then we've got a way to be able to adjust those
not a good idea
shapes to make it so that we can.
Not a
the point
good
is the
idea.
animation is transferable. Excellent. If you make an animation on one, you transfer it over. You might have to do a tweak or two, but that's it. Whereas in PoE1,
I made a tank. It was 2D. I like rigged it so the tracks and stuff would move, and tank and the like barrel and everything would move.
It's like, like it just immediately means
that animation not fun.
Okay, brilliant.
Yep.
So even if you could move it over, there'd still be a process of flipping it effectively.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So there's the things like that go on. There's funnily enough, did we actually make the Templar left-handed in PoE2 too with some tricks? I can't remember now. I can't remember. We might have. Anyway.
Oh my god, I wasn't watching the screen.
That's the thing. So yes, that one in PoE2 fixes that just because.
Like, who's he looking at?
The rigs are just way better. It's night and day. Like, you know, what the animators have to do. They're so much faster. Actually, there was another multiplying factor I didn't even mention, which is that in PoE1, most melee skills can be used by most weapon classes. And that means that once again, you still have to make the skill again for all of the different weapon types, which is another multiplier. On top of it as well. So therefore, pretty much when making a melee skill, there's pretty much the only option for the designers is you have to use an existing melee animation that we have already. So that already just limits significantly the ability to design melee skills in PoE1. Just like completely just kicks out the feet out from under you right there. Especially given how crap the animations are from back in the day from that. So you've got that. Another detail that's important is that there are too many
what
things
just happened there?
In Melee, in PoE1, that are multiplying factors that you have to know to do that improve the amount of damage that you're doing for Melee and don't feel like Melee for whatever that might mean.
Would these be things like totems?
Example, exactly, right? So a totem is an example.
Fucking
It doubles your
totems.
damage effectively. And you just have to.
I hate that I have to spend like 8 skill points on it.
Double damage, and you just have to know that, right? So that's just a straight up noob trap. Now, this is actually a somewhat hard problem to solve because you want to have the ability. Okay, like how can totems in Path of Exile 2 exist? Is a question, right? Like how can they? I mean, sure.
It'd have to be automatic. Happen when you hit something.
So that, how do you have a game where a melee class can create a totem that effectively is a complete independent entity from you that attacks things, and you don't have to be near it, because that's a straight-up damage multiplier, right? How can we have that exist, and yet not everyone has to pick it?
Not a skill gem, a skill
point,
point, maybe?
You have to have lots and lots of things, and the trade-off is not so much do I pick a multiplying force or don't I? It's which of the 30 things I could pick am I picking depending on what I want to enjoy, right? And that all comes back down to the way that the skill system in Path of Exile 2 works versus 1, where, you know, like you can, like the limiting factor on the number of multipliers you have is the number of slots, like gem slots you have, because all of them can be 6 links and so on. Like there's a whole thing going on with that just makes it the case. So you can have totems in PoE2 because, sure, it may increase your damage by a lot, but then there's also tons of other
those
stuff
things are
you can
not
that could
taking
also increase
damage.
your damage by a lot. So it doesn't become such a important choice anymore. So PoE 1 just has several of these. There's also things like, God, I'm terrible with names. What's that yellow star that goes beneath your feet that makes you resistant to
Fortify.
damage?
People in the chat will know what you're on about.
Yeah, people know what I'm talking about. That thing, right? So, for example, like that's important to have on your character somewhere. There's a thing like that. If you don't have it, then your defense is
I have
just
1,000
worse.
people saying fortify right now, so I'm assuming
Yeah,
it's
fortify. That's the one. Fortify. Yeah. By the way, just as a thing to know about me, I'm terrible with names. Like
I'm very, very
in
bad with
fact,
people names.
every time, like we have,
Couldn't
a
tell you the
meeting,
singer and
Chris
actor's
just
name.
tells me some fact about the person that's about to walk in the door that I can attach my understanding of who they are to. Like I don't remember their name, but I know who they are. You know what I mean? So he's
Yep,
always like,
no.
"Oh, he's the guy who," and then just adds a piece of information, and that's how I actually remember names. So just
I
names
hate
just fall out of my
names.
head otherwise.
I hate reading names.
So, anyway, random detail. So
Twitch
anyway,
chat
Fortify is
names,
another example of that. So we
YouTube
actually made a
names.
list of these recently. I was with Mark, and we're like, okay, what are
Hate
the
it.
multiplying things that a melee build must have to work? And which of these things feel like melee and which don't? And we can't in PoE 1 have the solution of having just lots of multiplying forces because it would require making more skills than we can really make, or else just that we run into problems with the skill system because of the way that you can't 6-link every gem that you have and so on, like just those kinds of issues. And so in PoE 1 we have to have a different solution, which might involve like changing it so that
Two
like,
beasts
this
and
is
one
not a thing
essence.
that makes sense to do anymore, or that we specifically split the build so that you can't use this, you know, this mechanic doesn't work very well with with normal melee or something like that. Like I don't have an actual answer for what exactly is going to happen, but like there are things that we want to do there. But in PoE 2 we don't have that particular problem because because we've got so many multiplying factors, and it's just
Brilliant.
like the intention is
A patch in PoE2, or not PoE2, PoE1 is nerf the multipliers. Like, don't make totems with double damage, make them like 25%. And then just give that damage back to the skill itself. That might be a patch band-aid fix that could help, maybe.
that you know,
I don't know.
that issue solved in my opinion.
There
So
would
what
be
else do
a
we have?
hundred
Melee's
different
gonna
problems
be
with that.
good. I like the fact that in the chat right now we've got people saying that this is now the reason that when Chris Wilson walks out on stage, he says, hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games, because you're then sat in the audience going, that's who you are. Knew it. I know that guy now. I was worried. Now I know who that is.
For sure.
So, Jonathan, continue telling us about how melee class is going to work in Path of Exile 2 and how it's going to be good.
All right, so the next one is moving while doing melee is something that Path of Exile 1 could just not support for a variety of kind of complicated internal reasons relating to, once again, all the rigs and blah 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 and all that technical stuff. But ultimately in PoE 2 what we have is a thing called step attack. And what that is that we have a different animation that plays when you're a bit further away from the monster versus when you're close to the monster. And what that means is that when you do an attack, some of the attack time that you would have used, like
How do you
rather
break
than
free?
arriving at the monster and then doing the attack, you can do the attack from further back.
Those
And it still
fucking
takes the same
wheel
amount of time as
boys
it would have taken if you were
overloaded
standing
it.
next to them. And that means that every single attack has less close time than it would appear to have.
He talks with his hands, and I like looking at his hands
feels
and
like the attack
realized I was
is,
looking at him and not the
faster
game.
than it otherwise would be. But in particular, like, you know, the portion of the screen on which you can do a melee attack is larger when you start it.
This character is gonna die
And
during
so that
watching
is an
this
important
interview.
reason. Now,
I
this
keep
actually varies
looking
quite
over.
significantly. For the monk, some of the skills have absurd distances.
Maybe we'll die
like,
while
you know,
I am.
with the most being like, you know, that palm strike where you can go from half a screen away. You can just like melee straight into them and you just like just slide up to them and attack them. It feels good as a palm strike. But every skill has some degree of that, and so that improves melee very significantly over what PoE 1 has. Not something we could do in PoE 1 because the animation time would be impossible. That I think is actually, by the way, one of the reasons why WSD does work in PoE 1 and in PoE 2 and didn't work in Pagan Online. because that element. There's a fluidity to the feeling of moving around where you kind of blend nicely from like I'm controlling my character to like my character kind of gets to the right place, and yet it doesn't take extra time. So that's kind of important. And then another thing that we've done is all the targeting stuff. So basically, in general, you don't really lose control of your character anymore. That is something that allows you to have longer attack times while not feeling bad. In PoE 1, all attacks must be ultra short, because if they're not, you feel like your character's locked in and you can't do anything, and that feels garbage. So you
How does
can
Elden Ring
significantly
and Dark
reduce
Souls
attack
get away
times
with
if
that?
you are willing to let the character reposition, retarget, and also cancel using dodge roll. So like that stuff there just immediately does that. Now, there was something you did say earlier, which I actually don't agree with, by the way, about having to be close to bosses to do melee.
Okay.
Being close to a boss is actually usually more safe than being further away, and that's because the amount of distance you have to move to change the relative position and angle to the boss is lower. You can get
Losing
to
sight of
a
them is
90
also
degree
very, very
offset from the boss
dangerous.
from where you were with a very short move when you're in melee, but a very long move when you're in ranged. So effectively, when there are attacks that hit arcs, those attacks are more dangerous for range than they are for melee. And so effectively, so long as bosses have
Hydra.
the
Good example
correct
of that.
number of attacks of the different types, you will find that melee and ranged are actually relatively balanced, and the distance to the target turns out to be one of the least important balancing factors for melee once you've made sure that you get the balance of skills correct. So it might seem like, for example, that ranged characters should do less damage than a melee character, but actually that is not so much the case. And we've found that if you make ranged characters weak, not like have a different amount of relative DPS compared to melee characters, then the ranged characters just feel bad, and that is a problem. But whereas if you make the melee characters do too much damage, that also feels bad because overkilling everything, and it just kind of just makes the game feel like a walkabout.
The
So,
speed of
yeah,
them
the
is
damage,
just better too.
the distance thing is actually surprisingly, despite the name, the least important thing about melee.
Okay.
Which I find to be good. But that being said, you do have to have that closing element, to make it work. That's kind of where
Yeah,
we're at
because
with
a
that. So I
ranger
think
can
that
close the
probably
distance
covers a
or
lot of things. I'm
something
sure there are
a lot
probably
faster
like
than a melee
half a
can.
dozen more random things about melee
Or
that
not
make it better,
can.
but those are certainly some of them.
They both have
and
the
some of big
exact
ones, I would
same
say.
amount.
Were there any other? Sorry, in that list you had earlier about issues with melee, were there any others that I didn't address in that?
I'll probably think of some. As I think of them, I'll just let you know again. But I think what you've mainly touched on is the fact that melee is going to be very much improved by an improved movement system, and the fact that you guys won't need to develop 7 different animations whenever you decide to do something.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, let's move on to question
The
9.
balance
Question
still
9
worries me.
is actually already about the redundant system we've
You
talked
didn't really
about
touch on that.
identifying items. Question 10, I didn't have time to program onto the screen, so I'm going to read my phone like a real professional here. What is the strangest design lesson you've learned over your time as a designer? I'll give you an example from kind of my history, so everyone in the chat kind of gets the vibe that I'm coming at this question with. I was a teacher for a long time. I was a drama teacher before I went on to being an actor, then being a YouTuber.
I can see it.
And while I was teaching in the classroom, I was erasing some writing that I'd put on a whiteboard, and I was using one of those kind of erasers going across, erasing horizontally, just wiping stuff off the board. And then another teacher pulled me aside at the end of the day, and they said, Josh, don't use horizontal strikes when you are erasing something from a whiteboard because it makes your butt wiggle. Use vertical stripes because that way your butt doesn't wiggle and it's not weird. And I thought that is such a random thing to know, but it's only through somebody else telling me that I now know that. So throughout your game design career,
That is a really weird thing for a teacher to point out.
But it works.
Well, that makes this question a whole lot harder. But I think probably one of the
because
things
he just
that
got hard.
came to an
Thinking about
understanding
it.
of at some point, but I guess doesn't quite have the nice little just so-ness of that story, is the fact that everything is game design. And I kind of let me talk about that. So ultimately, what are you doing when you're designing a game? You're trying to make something fun for the player. How do things become fun? So therefore, I would say that anything that you do that attempts to increase the amount of fun you get from a game is game design, right? Does that follow, if you will? So let me mention a few examples of this that seem a bit unintuitive. So if I post some patch notes and they can contain unexplained changes in them,
I swear to God,
then
the way that
the community
skeletons
can react very
attack
badly
is
with
different.
from that. And when they react badly, they have less fun when they're playing. But if I write an essay about why the changes are happening and convince people that the change we're making is actually good, then there are people who would not have had fun before who are having fun now. So therefore, community communication is game design. The fun that they experience in the game is affected by the decisions we make as far as communicating with the community. So therefore, we should treat that as a game designer part of the process. And it extends further than that because when you're looking, okay, let's look at a game like Elden Ring, right? Now, if you played that game and you weren't expecting something that was tough as nails at the beginning, you would probably have had less fun with that game. Like, the reputation that it has is actually part of the context you have going into that, which changes your perception of what exactly it is that you're playing and makes you more okay with the experience that you had, like when you just die early on in that game. You kind of feel like, well, yeah, it's Elden Ring, obviously I should expect, like it's a very different thing that you expect there. So like that communication of like reputation is part
lowering
of
the
your
desk.
game design. Like you have to actually bear that in mind as you're thinking about how you position that. And then that comes to a broader question of marketing. Like, you can market a game a certain way and in a different way, and that affects the fun that people have when they play it. And so that means the marketing is also game design. And that means that your game designers should be doing it, because that's actually part of the experience that they should get. And so you hear a lot of indie developers say, oh, I like to make games, but I just hate the marketing part. They'll talk about how that's like some separate part of game development that shouldn't be, that they hate the fact they have to do the marketing. And then you also get this source of the complaint of like, oh, if I was just better at, I'm just because I'm bad at marketing is the reason my game failed and so on. But I actually would say to those people, well, the marketing is the game design, actually. That's part of it. That needs to be included. Like you as a game designer need to do that, and you should look at it the same way as you look at designing anything that's in your game. Just because it's not happening to be in the game doesn't mean it isn't part of the fun that the player has.
That's incredible. The reason I think that is such an incredible answer is, again, theatre and game design tie together in such a strange way. My entire specialization when I was at university studying performing arts is a psychological element called phenomenology. And phenomenology is the idea that absolutely everything is
made up that
part
word.
of the experience you're trying to create. If you're putting
Right.
on a theatre show, the audience's experience of that show doesn't start when they sit down in their seats and the curtain opens. It starts when they very first see a flyer, and then when they walk into the foyer, when they're talking to their friends, when they see any kind of adverts about it. I was lucky enough many years ago to see The Lord of the Rings, the musical, on stage, and as soon as you walk into that theatre, there are actors dressed up as characters acting in character within the foyer itself, and it immediately creates that ambience, that level. So when you say that everything is game design, completely agree, because from a phenomenology point of view, every single experience someone has in relation to any major primary process or experience is going to relate to it. So your example...
The analogy or whatever that I'm thinking is like a baker, like a cake maker. Is adding the frosting and making the box look nice and having good posters for it and having the right price and all that, is that what makes a good baker? Or does the base cake or base sandwich or whatever does that tie into it? Don't know.
Of
Need to think about that.
communicating to the player base, it's not necessarily
My instinct says no.
manipulative, but you do need to understand
think
that
I'm
there
wrong.
is a way of getting information across that will be received more positively than negatively.
And the thing is that, okay, if I was to sit down and with every new player and talk to them as they were playing, I suspect that almost every player I did that with would have a great time.
Do a
like if
thing
I'm
that
sitting
you
here as
can't
the
say
game
on
director, being
Twitch.
like, oh yeah, here's what we're intending for this, here's what we're doing. Like, you'd probably have a great time.
How the hell did I hit that?
That thing that goes on there, like,
How long was that like
we're
that?
trying to effectively replicate some of that in our communication. But then there's another thing that I just would want to mention that just came to my mind as I was thinking about that.
Hate
And by the
being
way,
backseated
the thing you
in
just said there about
games.
there already being a name for
Hate
this
it.
in theatre is very interesting to me. I'm definitely going to look that up after this because I've never heard that word before, and I think that it is very much applicable, and that's pretty interesting.
He made it up. I'm telling you, that's not a
game
word. There's
journalism
no way that's a word.
and the phenomenon that games that people don't like later often have high review scores early on. Now, I think the reason why that can actually happen is because of the thing that I just said, where if you're a game journalist and you go to an event
You're told that
and
it's
you've
going
got
to
a
be
bunch of
amazing,
marketing
and
people
then it was
talking to
shit.
you and like all of that stuff, your impression of that game in that moment is going to be better than someone who just
He
turned up and
explains the
just
thing
played
that
it
I
with
was
no
thinking
context at
about.
all. And the fun that the person had is real, right? Like it doesn't compromise the fun they had. Like that is a real experience. It's not like there's any corruption there or anything like that. Right? It is a thing that is happening, but at the same time, you have to bear in mind that like that experience does affect what a reviewer's perception of this will be.
Oh, I
And so
disagree a
the
little
same is
bit.
true of
There
the
is
hype around
corruption
the
there.
game launch as well. Like people are just affected by that hype, even in ways that they don't necessarily understand, and it's part of the experience. But once again, the fun is still real. Like you can't say that wasn't the experience that the person had, and yet you still get the situation where a game comes out, a bunch of people review it well, you play it without that context, and you're like, well, what the hell? What did everyone like about this? Or just the review scores. The other phenomenon that review scores tend to go down as the game gets older, because like all the people who review it earlier on tend to like it more than the people who review it later, just on average.
Because that
Like
experience
all of that stuff
is a force
yeah,
multiplier.
exactly.
That experience is the totem. You put that down, you put someone in a place, the game is
Mm-hmm.
fun, but the experience is even better. I've been invited to so
It's
many
where the experience could be
game
worse is where I
opening
disagree.
things, and when they go down, they're like, "Are you enjoying the game?" And I'm like,
Oh,
"Well, it's got this wrong
what
with
was
it, this
that?
wrong with it, this wrong with it," and it's very difficult to focus on the negatives of a game or of an experience or of a process when you are surrounded by so many people who are hyped up for it and who are having a good time. So I've actually been contacted many times by MMORPG makers and developers, especially smaller indie games, who say, "Hey Josh, we'd love to make a video on our game. We'll get the devs in with you. You can play with the design team. Do you want that?" And I say, "No, I don't want that, because that is not what the
Oh my
average
God,
player
that
is
would
going
be
to
awful.
experience. I want to experience what the average player is going to experience in a genuine, honest, average way that is allowing me to make a kind of a judgment of the game without having my enhancement multiplied in a way that other people won't."
Yeah, they're getting away from it. So I forget my thought if I don't say it. So it's an experience. I'll just use Diablo as an example. It's where you build like this. Everything is made of gold. It's going to be an amazing experience. It looks great, and look at all this amazing stuff. And then you realize that it's paper mache painted gold. And that's in essence where like the marketing and everything made your experience better initially, and it falls off over time because you realize that it's not gold and there's so many problems with it, and all the hype and everything around it, and the marketing and the hype and the communities and the content creators and the people doing fake ads so they can get faking their reactions to it so they can get on Blizzard good side to have more paid ads for it or whatever, stuff like that. All the bad stuff. I'm saying there's good stuff in it. I'm just pointing out all the bad stuff with that. That is a really weird thing because you don't need it at all. Like Vampire Survivors, I'll use as an example. Like, was there any marketing for that game at all? Or was it just Asmongold played it or something? And it was just like, holy shit, that game looks actually so fucking fun. And you play it and it's just like, oh, this game is just so fucking fun. It has none of that stuff. Where your experience is really low in the beginning. You're like, oh, this kind of looks weird. This looks like a fucking dude made this in his basement with fucking, you just hit random keys. It looks really shitty. But then you play it, it's like, oh fuck, this game is actually really fucking good. Your experience goes up over time. And I wonder if that game had super big marketing, would it have been up the whole time? Like you'd have been really hyped for it and it's a really good game? Or would your experience gone down over time and you would look back at it as a negative experience? Like you're like, oh shit, this game looks fucking crazy. He did like Raid Shadow Legends level ads and animations and all that shit. And then you play it and you're like, oh, this is a fucking 2D shit looking game. You'd get people that like that. They're like, this game is fucking stupid. So it's a weird thing. It would if your experience ever goes higher or lower than your initial impression, it like gives you an impression of the whole game. Like last Epoch, my initial impressions of it, I didn't really have marketing of it. I missed that part of it. It was just that one guy, that the Diablo guy, that was like, Diablo players are gonna hate Last Epoch. That's the only reason I knew it was releasing. I thought it would. I mean, I knew of it, like knew of it in beta and stuff. I just and as time went on, my impression of that whole game just got worse and worse and worse. Um, but I wonder if you'd had Diablo level marketing for that game, would it have even been even worse from the start, or would I have been, would that cliff, that slope downwards, would that have been steeper? Um, and then I guess just tie this back into PoE, with them hyping up PoE, with the community hyping up PoE. Oddly enough, these delays, I wonder if these delays are helping that aspect, where people aren't building this game up to be this amazing thing. They're knocking the community down a little bit with each one of these, so that when the baseline comes in for the release of the game, we're not up in fucking La La Land thinking this is going to be the perfect thing that ever came out on 1.0. I don't know. I wonder how. I'm really scared for this game. I think this game is going to be a coin flip of super amazing or super dog shit. I don't think there's going to be an in between. I think it's either going to be a fucking amazing game or it's something I never want to play again. And I'm playing Hollow Knight or Ori's game instead. Yeah.
Have that.
Right.
So whenever Path of Exile 1 or Path of Exile 2 are going to throw these big events, yes, people at the events are going to love it, but we need to make sure the players just playing it at home love it just as much. And one of the best ways to do that is...
That's what I was mentioning about, like, the content creators, like, showing what they like and stuff, but then when you actually play it...
This is part of the process. This is part of the phenomenology of it. My question, Jonathan, is this going to continue once the game launches? Because this is hype. This is building up hype. This is building up audience expectations. This is great. I know this is marketing for you. I know it's staying relevant for me. But are the audience going to still get this level of communication once the game's out?
Well, I certainly want to.
I thought he was
there was a period. So I like. There have been periods in the past where I engage.
They could do campfires.
Periods where I engage less, and it's honestly the hard part is not becoming jaded to it. Like, this is a challenge for sure, right? Like, I mean, you had your quip earlier
the
about,
fucking...
I want to respond on Reddit. You know,
could you respect
when
passives
really
more?
I
need for every fucking interview, every question.
The thing is that I remember, I guess it would have been sort of 15 years ago now, actually, now that I think about how long ago this was. Because I was a Redditor before I was a game developer, you know. And so therefore, when I started game development, one of the reasons why PoE1 had so much interaction with the community on Reddit is just because, like, that's where I already hung out. You know, like, so therefore it was just an extension of the thing that I was already kind of doing. So it didn't feel like work to do that. And
new Bex just doesn't hit the same.
It's very hard to maintain that kind of relationship when it feels like work. And so that is that
mainly because I don't even know their name.
It's very hard to artificially be like, I am going to engage with the community now. You know what I mean? Like, it has to feel like a fun thing to do. So these interviews that I do, like this, I do really enjoy these. Like, I actually just have a lot of fun just answering questions and chatting and so on. And it's not kind of that. And I think a lot of the reason is just because, like, and quite frankly, you don't get the same level of like just random person pops.
Be nice if you were just on, you know, some of these.
Like, that's the
one of them.
That's the like it's not as psychologically.
Hey, can let me interview Chris
on a thing like this. So
that'd be sick.
Yeah, so that's the thing. But that being said, like over the Christmas period, I did engage with Reddit a bunch on the Path of Exile 2 subreddit, and I actually quite enjoyed that. And the only reason why I kind of stopped was just because I got busy with other things and so on. And I sort of was enjoying that again, so I was kind of hoping that I'd be able to do that again, because it is fun to do.
Scheduled campfires might be
it's sort of challenging. The ultimate thing is that it has to not feel like work, and it has to not feel like you're just getting constantly Well, no, because it feels unfair to
barraged
say
by the
to the
same
audience, "Hey, you're
fucking
not allowed to
stupid
say anything bad
questions.
to me," right? Because obviously that's not okay either. Like you can't request that of anyone because obviously they're gonna have opinions and all their opinions are real and all that sort of stuff, right? It's just that like it is tough though, especially if you're the kind of person.
My
which I think most
super
people are,
honest
where
opinion
you
was
can see 100 great
I
comments, and
wasn't
one
a
comment you look at and
fan
you're
really
like,
of
crap, And the
Mark
thing is like
or
it's very easy to dwell on that as
Jonathan.
well, as I am kind of want to do, being the kind of person
When this
who
first started, I was
looks
just
at a
like,
game and sees only the bad things in it.
why the fuck are they here? I
You
want to hear
see
from
that one bad
Chris.
comment and it's like it sticks with you, and you think, oh man, how can I
I don't know
turn
what
this
it
one
was. Mark
person's
grew on me
opinion
very
around?
quickly.
Like, what is the thing I have to do to fix this? You know what it's on? And that's just very
Oddly enough, it might have been that Mark when he said, he was like, oh, you might not notice. It was Exile Gone, actually. You might not realize who I am. So I lost a bunch of weight, and I was losing a bunch of weight at the same time. I don't know why that has anything to do with it. I've lost 50 pounds over the last year. Gotta lose a little more. But it might be, I don't know, a random thing. And Jonathan's, I think what grew on me about Jonathan was, I don't know, he didn't seem confident when he first started these, but his passion for the game, that he is a yapper about the game, I like that. I like it. And their passion came through. That it wasn't showing from the start, I don't think. Or like, we knew this is Chris's game. Like, we know how passionate he is over the years. Well, I guess we didn't have that with those two. Beginning. Sorry, so total side tangent about them and stuff, but
training, right?
Oh no,
So
exactly what you
that's
said,
yeah. So that is where the community outreach stuff is difficult. But also the reason why doing these kinds of formats of interviews all the time is great. Like, I'm happy to just do one of these every 2 weeks, and like, we can just do that forever, and that's fine. And when the when the negative stuff is approached in a this kind of interview, people tend to not say it in a like sure, you're like, Melee's crap, and I'm like, sure, like, it doesn't bother me in the same way when it's delivered in this kind of context that it would if I was just reading comment after comment after comment about people complaining about whatever random thing. So it's a lot easier for us to absorb that way.
Because he's saying it as a joke, that they're
saying
not
that
saying it as
he
a
would
joke.
prefer if all
That helps probably
feedback
too.
was delivered in the form of bingo charts, because like, he just finds that very easy to digest. That's the kind of thing where, like, getting that.
They should have done this
information is very
interview, and in
important.
the
Like, you can
background there's
never
just
lose
like a
sight of the
stack
fact
of
that
bingo
receiving the
charts that
negativity
they printed out
is
from
very,
people.
very important to do. But at the same time,
Funny
you
as
just have to do
fuck.
it in a way that's not quite so psychologically horrible.
a
for the
healthy
person
way. I mean,
doing it.
I experienced it on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, making a video that was not received well at all, and I had to explain to people that negative comments do tiny amounts of psychic chip damage.
I
but
swear to
positive
God they do.
comments, or as great as they are, they don't necessarily
But they-
refill that. So you're
they don't
losing
do
1
chip
HP
damage to
every
me, they
single
do
time.
buff
And people say to me,
damage.
"Oh, just
Negative
read the
comments
negative
rile me up.
I don't know they're negative until
I
I've
like
read
it.
them.
More
And
negative
after
comments.
having read them, I'm thinking,
I enjoy fighting
"Wished
with
I
you.
hadn't read that." I don't
But-
mind
but also on
constructive
some-
criticism.
But yes, they also are important, though, right? Like, you can't just. And I'm always the other thing as well is that once again, about the whole jaded thing, is that you have to always remember that every person who ever says something about negative about your product has some reason for doing so, right? Like, even as disingenuous as some things might end up being, there's still some.
Some guy
reason
might
to
say
do
something
that. There
negative
is
just because they don't like his shirt.
Like, I guess it can be, once again, a bit unhealthy to even think that way, because you end up chasing to fix every single problem anyone ever has. But at the same time, you do need to know about the stuff that's bad. Otherwise, you're just living in denial. And with PoE2, one thing that's super.
Let's see, is there anything I've ever said bad about the game? Or what was my reason for saying bad? The stuff I've said bad, but what is my reason for saying it's bad? Let them continue while I think about that.
Super important is that I never want to live in that denial ever. Like, I want to be of the case of, like, if there is a problem, we do actually need to take it on and try and fix it. Like, we can't have excuses anymore, because it's very easy to have excuses, and it's especially easy to have excuses when you're running a live game, because you can always use the excuse of change is hard and people won't accept this and people won't accept that and all these other things, right? The excuses are very easy to generate. But there really should be no excuses when you're making a sequel, because everything then is up for change, right? Like we can change anything. Anything that people do have problems with, we should be able to come up with a better system. And so that whole like sort of no excuses way of looking at things, I think is just ultra important, and something that I think I did improve on in the last probably 2 years or 3 years maybe compared to before, where I was less willing to open up
Feels like
things
ever since
to
ExileCon.
change. And you know, and the funny thing about that as well is that
Might have been earlier.
another
That's what you're
interesting
saying, and that's
phenomenon
what
we've
it feels
had
like.
is
It.
that we will open that up for discussion for PoE2. We'll make a change, and then once we've done it in PoE2, we're like, well, why aren't we doing this in PoE1? It's just better. And so there's actually been more of that, like kind of things that we've decided, hey, you know, what if we could actually change this? It's slow because, you know, once again, you've got the whole community to deal with, but we are, like, I would say that making PoE2 is affecting PoE1 in this way, where we're more open to changing things about it because of the fact that we're able to kind of like see what it's like to do it, or you know, and even it can be as simple as like when we actually went to do it, we found it wasn't as hard as we thought it was going to be, and that's just like a classic psychological issue, right? Of like, you know, you procrastinate on something forever, and then when you actually go to do it, you're like, oh, actually, you know what? That turned out to be easy. It wasn't nearly as bad as I thought, and so you come sometimes just sort of getting that situation as well, when you really say, okay, we're going to do this now. It turns out it wasn't quite as bad to implement as we thought, and you know what? Maybe we could just do it in PoE1 as well. So
I love that you have the freedom to.
Okay, two things. One, I forgot already. Fuck. It's gone. I had a thought. I waited way too long. It's gone now. Oh, I thought I remembered. Okay. The only thing that they have to worry about is changing, going from PoE 1 to 2 and changing stuff. It's like, you know, repainting the Mona Lisa or something. Sure, it had imperfections and stuff. But those imperfections made it what it was, and like people hate like the change of it. Like why fix what ain't broke? Stuff like that. But yeah. Anyways, the thing that I thought of that I was way too vocal on trade stuff, trade related changes and all that stuff to begin with. Mainly because this is what I was thinking. The reason was because it made me feel worse about the game. And I was like, why does trade when I play SSF make me feel worse? And it was because like you can trivialize, like people are trivializing accomplishments that I have in this version of the game, or like my accomplishments are trivial to them, which made me feel bad about it. Which still happens. I still feel shitty when it's like, oh, someone's like, oh yeah, I just bought all the gear for that class. Why is your trapper right now not able to kill red bees? Mine is, and it was like, oh, you just what do you have? And it's like, oh, I bought all these items for it, and a level 21 gem and all this stuff, and it's like, oh, that feels shitty. But then it's just like, doesn't bother me as much anymore. It's the only thing about that bothers me is if they start from a point of like, it's what Quinn says, is like they start from a point of balancing the game around trade. That feels bad. That feels real bad when the SSF gets a nerf because of something that happens in trade. But yeah, I guess that would be a thing of like feeling bad or giving a negative feedback on something for a different reason than the thing itself isn't the problem. Like trade isn't the problem. It was the feeling the trade was giving me was the crux of the issue and stuff. Yeah, long segue to what they were talking about, but yeah.
Explore that now. One thing I'd like to push into and look at, and we're getting
Look
to
into yourself.
the end of the interview.
What problems do
which
you
is
have with the
something
game or
I'm
other games
really
that
interested in. We've
come
spoken
from
about
feelings
what you've learned
from other
games
stuff?
that you've liked.
Get self-reflective.
Though I always think you can learn a hell of a lot from bad stuff. You can learn a hell of a lot about either what you don't want to do, or you can see one system that shines within an otherwise poor game. Now,
What is it, like mistakes
specifically
teach you
throw shade at
faster
any game
than
designers or developers
progress
or
or
games
something?
that you might not like.
Whenever
But
it's
I'll
the
give you an
saying or
example
something
for
like that.
myself in a second, so we know it's all fair. I'd like you to have a think about the games that you've played that you thought were bad, I'm not going to say the letter and the number combination that chat are asking me to say because it's too easy. I'm not going to do that. Games that you've played that were bad, but
D4
had
bad.
one system in that you thought
D4 bad.
is fantastic. I'm taking it. I'm learning from it. Here's an example from me. I'm recently playing.
They
an
took
MMO
last
called
Epoch's portal
Chaos
system,
to make a video.
and I fucking love it.
It's a bad game in general.
Doing this.
But in the game, there is a mount.
God, I just used like 10
The
portals.
mount is actually tied to the
I
shoulder
fucking love
pads
it.
that your character wears. So when you get given a mount, it's actually kind of summoned by your shoulder pads. And when you put them on, the shoulder pads take the form of the shape of the head of the mount that you're going to have. So I got given a tiger mount,
Oh,
and my
that's
shoulder pads
fucking
were now
cool.
tigers.
What game?
Which looks really cool. And when I'm running around all of the kind of cities and whatnot, and I'm seeing other players, and someone's
Wait,
got
what
like
game is this?
a metal elephant shoulder pad on, and someone else has got a bat shoulder pad on, it's telling me the kind of mount that they ride out in the wild, and I think that's really cool. So, yeah, it's a bad game, but it's got a pretty good system in it that I would like to see used again. What games have you played that you think...
Wait, I gotta rewind. What was that game? Fuck, Red Beast's gonna kick my ass while I'm trying to do it. Fuck off, Red Beast. Yeah, now that I'm fucking hunting you down, you want to run. Okay.
The mount is actually tied to the games that you've played that were bad, but had one system in that you thought, that is fantastic, I'm taking it, I'm learning from it. Here's an example from me. I'm recently playing an MMO called Karos to make a video on it. It's a bad game in general. But in the game, there is a mount system.
Okay, never heard of it.
The mount is actually tied to the shoulder pads that your character wears. So when you get
That is
given
an
a mount,
interesting
it's actually
mechanic.
summoned by your shoulder pads. And when you put them on, the shoulder pads take the form of the shape of the head of the mount that you're going to have. So
Like, they couldn't do
I
this in
got given a
PoE
tiger
because
mount, and my
MTX.
shoulder pads
Everyone's
were now
running
tigers,
MTX.
which looks really cool. And when I'm running around all of the kind of cities and whatnot, and I'm seeing other players, and someone's got like a metal elephant shoulder pad on, and someone else has got a bat shoulder pad on, it's telling me the kind of mount that they ride out in the wild, and I think that's really cool. So, yeah, it's a bad game, but it's got a pretty good system in it that I would like to see used again. What games have you played that you think are bad, but do something really well?
It's a really tough question to think of. I'm trying to think of what games I've played recently that are bad that I...
It can be old games that you played as a child. So I played
can be,
Devil May Cry
sure.
2 through as a child, unfortunately. And looking back on that now, that's one of the few games that I can't think of anything positive at all.
You know what's funny? You know it's funny because like people will probably kill me for this, but the only Devil May Cry game I played was DMC Devil May Cry, which I believe is the one that, from my understanding anyway, not being in that community, is the one that a lot of the people hated, like because it wasn't made with the same developer or some other stuff like that.
Jonathan,
so,
you're losing the chat. You're losing the...
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Everyone loved you up until this point, Jonathan. It was really
terrible.
positive, and we've
Hey,
gone
I've
down
never
to-
played a Devil May
This
Cry, I
is
don't
not
think.
a-
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
okay,
I
sir.
know.
Maybe Devil May Cry
I was
3 or
informed-
4 or something?
I was informed
rings a
as
bell,
to how terrible my Devil May Cry experience is. But anyway, I'm trying to think about the question. So I mean, look,
The
the
sin
obvious
to have
one
never played them.
that people will want me to talk about is D4, of course. Even though
You said
can
it,
say
not
it's too
me.
easy.
I didn't say it.
obviously.
I haven't brought it up.
Yeah.
How big
What
is
did
the
I like?
party that you guys throw every time Blizzard fuck up? Is it like,
I
is there like a
don't-
fund
you know-
set aside
no,
for
I
it?
don't
And
really-
they
I-
release
I-
something
I-
and you're like, guys, get the party
I- you
poppers
know,
out. We're gonna have a surge of players.
I don't feel that way, honestly.
It's
because
the
when I look at
rising tide
or,
raises all ships. It really fucking
um,
does. Whenever they do well, it's
I mean, it may
their
sound
income
trite,
increases.
But I don't really
so it's-
celebrate the bad things that happen to others, if you know what I mean. Like, I mean, that sounds like I'm being
He's
overly
such a
political
good
when I say
man.
that, but
Chat, we
No,
can't
no, I
even hate
understand.
Jonathan. He's
The
like,
thing is-
you can
the
do
thing is-
better. I love it.
what I feel in my heart is the pain that they must be feeling, if you know what I mean. Whenever I see that, because I am a developer and so I relate easily to that. And,
yeah.
So that's kind of what I look at. And so I mean, look, if I look at some games recently that I did,
How
that
shitty
were
would you feel if
absolutely
you knew
terrible that I can
they
talk about
weren't
what
feeling
they-
that and they were just like,
Like, so
yeah,
Starfield
we
comes
did
to
want
mind.
this to suck.
Like
That would feel...
uh,
That would like
that game-
enrage him, I feel like.
Yep.
Because it would enrage me.
that game.
But why?
Um,
Why
I don't
was
think
it
that's the
bad?
case
What
at all,
did it
though. I
do
just-
that Didn't meet
imagine
your
if you did
expectations, or you as a game
find that out.
designer, a game developer, you were playing it and you were thinking, why on earth have they chosen to do this?
So right from the beginning, the plot was like a problem for me. It didn't seem to make narrative sense right at the beginning, and that was concerning to me. The other thing I actually hate that, and so games that do this,
He's
have a
taking the
hard time
wrong
winning me
part of the
back
question.
when
He
they
needs
put
to
you
find
in
the
a
good
giant
thing in the thing that he
megacity
hates.
right very early, and there's
Silver
no
oil? Nice.
like it's too like I much prefer games that have smaller hubs than what that game has. So like just I know some people love exploring that kind of stuff, and that's for them. But for me, I tend to not really like that sort of stuff. So that there was that going on. The next one is that the gunplay was bad, and you could see the gunplay was bad right from the first trailers they were launched. Like it just wasn't. It didn't look right. I actually, it's funny. I for some reason seem to be able to tell whether FPS combat is going to be good just from the trailer. Like it's actually fairly easy for me to see, and I could just tell right from the word go that Starfield's gunplay wasn't going to be that great.
You've won
So
the
that's
chat
another
back.
issue.
When did
Everyone's
he
like, "We're back on
swap to
board." Right,
Starfield?
forget
He
the
lost
developers,
me.
but
I was
See
like,
it has, so like just it's concerning to me. The other thing I actually hate that and so games that do this have a hard time winning me back is when they put you in a giant mega city.
didn't meet your expectations, or you as a game designer, a game developer, you were playing it and you were thinking, why on earth have they chosen to do this?
So right from the beginning, the plot was like a problem for me.
he didn't say the
It
game.
didn't-
Okay.
it
He's
didn't
talking
seem to
about
make
Starfield,
narrative
not Diablo.
sense right at the beginning, and that was concerning to me. The other thing I actually hate that, and so games that do this have a hard time winning me back is when they put you in a giant mega city right very early, and there's no, like it's too like I much
What
prefer
level am
games
I?
that have smaller
Oh, we
hubs
started at
than
70. We're already
what
80.
that game has. So like just I know some people love exploring that kind of stuff, and that's for them. But for me, I tend to not really like that sort of stuff. So that there was that going on. The next one is that the gunplay was bad, and you could see the gunplay was bad right from the first trailers they were launched. Like it just wasn't. It didn't look right. I actually, it's
I
funny.
was so confused. I was like, what the fuck Diablo
For some
gunplay
reason
is
seem
he
to be able to
talking
tell
about?
whether
It was
FPS
Starfield.
combat is going to be good just from the trailer. Like it's actually fairly easy for me to see, and I could just tell right from the from.
I feel like
the word go
it's
that
pretty
Starfield's
common
gunplay wasn't
to
gonna be that
see
great.
that.
You've won
So
the
that's
chat
another
back.
issue.
Everyone's like, we're back on board.
Right.
We can forget the Devil May Cry stuff. We're back on board with
Yeah,
Jonathan.
yeah. And then the other one was as well is that I'm not personally a fan of the whole here's a bajillion items, all of which are junk, which in a fantasy game
Like Fallout and
like
stuff,
Skyrim,
wherever
can
you
actually
pick
get
up
away
every
with,
gun
'cause
and
most
everything,
people
it's all
know that,
junk.
like,
But oh my
cheese
god, I just fucked
isn't
up that.
necessarily something that matters to your character. But in a sci-fi game, when you've got like some random object that's called like a quantum, whatever doohickey, right? Like, how do I know whether this is some important crafting material or whether it's just some random piece of junk? So I think that sci-fi wasn't doing that game any favors when it comes to that loot system, as far as items go.
That
So
links
there was
back to
kind
the
of-
idea that we spoke about earlier of effectively coding anything in your game with what the audience expectation already is, the Jungian archetypes and the idea of having classes. When you give a player in a fantasy game random bit of string, they're thinking, okay, I don't need this. But when you give a player in a fantasy sci-fi game, important sensor module, you're thinking this is a key item that's going to be relevant to the game, when it's actually a random piece of junk. So I can understand where you're coming from with that.
The only way you can do
Sci-fi
that is by
just a
color
straight up
coding it.
uphill battle
Common
in all
useless junk.
respects with regard to this stuff. Like, there's so much player expectation around
It's like Baldur's Gate 3 it actually has an issue with this. Like you pick up a pickaxe and you're like, oh fuck, this pickaxe, I need this to mine the mithril ore and stuff. And like I can mine, nope, you don't. It's literally junk. It doesn't do anything. There's no point to it. There's no thing. Oh, and you're like, oh, I got what's the big one? It's the one you always pick up. It's on the tip of my tongue. You pick up a bunch of them, but you never use them. Bottles is one of them, kind of. But it's not bottles. It's the other thing. It's is it leather straps? Straps? Something. It's something like that. I can't think of what it is. It's always in your inventory. It's always at the bottom. You think it's going to be useful. It's not.
fantasy that you can just lean on really hard. And it's funny because, like, even just trying to come. So I've actually tried as just a design exercise before to come up with a mod system for a sci-fi game, and coming up with an interesting mod system for guns is so hard. Like it is actually just it is 1,000 times harder than coming up with one for like the idea of the magical sword is just so ingrained in the psyche of what a magical sword might do is just like it's so easy compared to what you have to do for sci-fi. So yeah, like that's just straight up hard in itself. Yeah, I was playing that game. I mean, people talk about as well about the okay, so the thing that people did like and the thing that generally was very well received in that game was the shipbuilding system. That's the kind of thing that I do actually
Okay,
like.
he's loop it back around to the actual
I'm
question.
a fan of this kind of stuff. So yeah, that is, and this is probably a very easy answer because this is the thing that a million people have said, right? That oh yeah, sorry, not Skyrim. Starfield was bad, but the shipbuilding was cool, and you know they're absolutely right about that. That is an example. Not to say that I have a shipbuilding Path of Exile idea that I want to steal from, but you know you never know.
Can you confirm that now? Someone in the chat earlier, Jonathan, said
Boats.
this stream has not given us any new Path of Exile 2 information, and I fundamentally disagree with that. We've already had several new systems that you've mentioned, several things that I don't know whether you should have mentioned or not, but they are there. So if anyone in the chat goes back and watches this VOD, there is information there.
Ooh.
Jonathan, can you or can you not confirm that you want to bring some kind of boat building to Path of Exile 2?
You know, the number of times we've gone to design a league, and then the start of the conversation is, okay, so we're finally going to do boat building league. It's happened so many times. And then so many times it would be like, oh, we can't do it for various reasons. It's just never actually managed to work. Yeah, that is actually, funnily enough, a thing that we've actually wanted to do a ton of times. But
I'm not hearing a no, Jonathan.
I don't know how the fuck you would do that in this game.
For why you haven't done it yet, but I'm not hearing no.
PoE2, there's a whole island act. So therefore, there is
boats.
and you do have a boat. There's just no there's just currently no upgrade systems for it. But there will be the potential. There's potential there for a
add the
point
Kingdom
for
Hearts
how a
gummy
boat building
system
league
between
could happen in
acts.
PoE2 potentially. So I guess we'll see if that happens one day.
So many years from now, when there is one, we can look back on this interview and say it was always prophesized, was always going to be there. Jonathan, let's really split the chat down the middle on this one. Have you played many Elder Scrolls games, Morrowind, Oblivion, or Skyrim?
So Skyrim, yes. Morrowind, yes, but not as much as I should have probably played it.
I've never played Morrowind.
Okay. Oblivion, how far did I get through Oblivion?
I played Oblivion at my friend's house. We read the whole book as we played through it.
What is the best Elder Scrolls game?
I mean, if you look at it in terms of the ones that I finished, then it would have to be Skyrim, although I'm sure there's a lot of disagreement about that. But Skyrim was the one that actually
has to be Skyrim. It just has to be.
Really.
I get that the other ones were good, and the other ones had amazing systems, but it just has to be Skyrim.
We're way down there.
Yeah, no, I'm sure
that.
Did you mean
Morrowind, Jonathan?
Yeah. But here's the thing, right? As I said, like I just never really got into Morrowind for whatever reason. So therefore, I don't have enough experience.
It was before my time.
Like, I effectively, Skyrim wins by default due to the fact that that is the one that I finished.
I'm hearing you say Morrowind, Jonathan. I'm throwing you a lifeline on this one. I'm saving you in the chat. He likes Morrowind. It's fine.
So this, I wish that I knew why it was that I bounced off Morrowind, because there really should be no reason why I did particularly.
I think it wouldn't stand up to the test of time. I bet if I went back and played it.
I'm trying to think back.
Morrowind is difficult in the start because, in fact, this ties in really nicely to PoE2. Morrowind is a game that is easy if you already know exactly what you need to do and exactly where everything is, and you don't need to wiki everything because there are things that you can miss and lock yourself out of. People have said to me they find Path of Exile 1 difficult because it's a game you have to play with either advanced knowledge of what you're about to do or the wiki open at the same time. And I still believe that the
Wait, do I have the wiki open right now?
Grid, if you will, on Path of Exile 1 is intimidating the first time you see it, and you really do need to kind of know where you're going to go to.
I have a bunch of other tools.
Checks and balances. What measures are you
passed the check. I don't have it open right now.
That's going to help keep a player in the game instead of them feeling that they need to go and search for outside knowledge?
That is a very, very hard question.
Now, hate
it's funny
this.
Because
needs to be in the game, all of it.
One of the first videos I ever saw of yours was the YouTube short where you opened the Path of Exile skill tree, and the thing you first said was
the idea of
it was something like you said something along the lines of I don't like it when games have all the complexity up front rather than having it so that the game evolves over time and gets more complicated as you go through it. Which I don't actually disagree with, by the way, as a point. But okay, here's a random anecdote for you. I feel like I'm way off topic. Whatever, we'll just do it anyway. When before Path of Exile 1 shipped, actually not very long before it shipped, I had a thing that I was pretty in favor of. Chris was very much not in favor of, and I was convinced to go the other way with it for probably good reasons.
I've never seen
which
this
was
read
that
before.
Should there be Fog of War on the passive skill tree?
Ooh. Okay.
So this was a idea that we're like, okay, well, first of all, anyone who opens the skill tree, like, okay, the skill tree will just be online. It'll be there, right? So having Fog of War on it won't change the fact that you could still plan a build.
Maybe
right? Like
as a tutorial, like a smaller separate tree, or the first few bits as a tutorial, and then when you've taken 3 or 4 steps, it opens up.
I mean, I was literally suggesting at the time that we just have it so that
It would have to be one time,
just like how it works in an RTS game, right? Where like you can see a certain distance from the node that you've got that you've allocated. So effectively, like you don't know what you're going to find until you get there. Now, I don't think this was a good idea by any means now, really, because you do need to have goals. There's a lot of other things going on and so on. But that was the thing, right? And that was an attempt to solve that problem of like, can we make it so that the passive skill doesn't seem so complicated when you first open it? Now, the other idea I came up with when that idea was bad was, okay, should we have an unlock system whereby sections of the tree get unlocked by certain in-game actions, so that like you have to, so the thinking here was
you have
like,
to do
okay,
lab to get like your second
maybe
part of the
this wasn't,
tree.
like, I'm just gonna pick like, because this was not really a fully thought through system, but let's say that you
Be
kill
interesting.
like, 500 people with a sword, and now the sword area of the skill tree opens up because you've demonstrated the fact that you're interested in specializing more into this or something like that. Like, we kind of had this idea of like slowly opening up, and the idea was that you could see adjacent chunks and what the conditions were that would unlock them. And then we even thought maybe what you could do is have it so that once a chunk was unlocked on one character, that it's unlocked for all your characters, so that you've kind of got this idea of like you're slowly unlocking the whole tree for your account or something like that.
I mean,
I feel like this could
these,
work.
vague ideas.
He's
That's
onto
really close to
something here.
Master's. The idea of you go through the ascendancies and you go through the gauntlet, and then you get another smaller skill tree that you're able to build onto and add to by getting points from doing that. So while everyone in the chat's saying, no, don't lock off specific areas.
Oh, no. I'm not saying we'll do that now.
Achieving something is great.
It's the
the
problem
I
would be when you want to
back
race
when I first
to another side of the tree.
The reason I was talked out of it,
Oddly enough, I don't do it in this build, but if I wanted to go
we'll be having, right? Like, they are valid
here,
concerns to
here,
have.
here, 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 here,
So
here,
there's
here,
a
to
lot
get all
of
the
it
way
comes
to
down to
here.
the fact that
For whatever
we
reason.
felt that showing the whole skill tree was the least bad option
That's why that
as
would
far
suck.
as wanting to have a skill tree like this is concerned. Like, I don't think that there would be a way to have a skill tree like this without doing it where you can see the whole thing like this. Now,
Man, there's so many different ways I could think of to do this. Like, you can only see this up from this cluster to right here, this jewel, and like from here to this cluster on this character until you play a ranger, and then this triangle opens up permanently. And it's like from here, from like here, from these, like draw a line between these two clusters to this line right here. It's like Act 5. That's all you have to work with until Act 5. Beat Act 5, this whole section unlocks. So you have to go through on each character your first time ever playing through, and you unlock everything. And like you don't even see the center part until you unlock Scion. I don't think this would be a great idea. If it would work at all, it would be interesting if they did something like that. You don't see this at all. This claw thing doesn't exist until you equip a claw and you kill one enemy with a claw equipped. Then the claw masteries all appear. You don't see the curses until you apply a curse. could be interesting. Because you'd be like, I'm an experienced player and I want to throw on a claw immediately. Fine, you know the claw mastery is there. Just throw a claw and it'll appear, and you know that it'll appear. But it won't scare away a new player having claws, daggers, bows, arrows, swords, all this right here. This whole section would be gone till you equip one of it. This is janky. This needs to go away. I need to figure out a better way to do this. It needs to just branch from right here. This circle needs to go away, and it just needs to start this point right here. It needs to be this button, and the branch just needs to come off of it. That's what needs to happen there. I don't know why they've never done that. The fact that it covers part of the tree is really omega bad design. I don't know. That could be interesting. Yeah, you just wouldn't see this claw. You wouldn't see these swords, and you would be really simple. You're like, oh, that's like crit. No, you wouldn't even see this trap, maybe, stuff. The center part until you like equip a skill that uses it and stuff. It'd be a really simple tree. And like you equip like a fire, like, you know what I said about the different sections? Let's say you equip a fire skill and then like you see like the fire come up over here and here, and you're like, oh, I can like go up and around like that. And it'll show like damage over time stuff too. And it's like, oh, that stuff's all related as well. So it does everything related to it. Huh. Interesting thoughts they could do.
In order for that to not be the case, you'd have to fundamentally change the skill tree in some other way. So like the thing I just said, for example, that has the like locked off stuff, like there would be a way to not have this problem, but it would fundamentally change the skill tree in ways that I think Path of Exile players probably wouldn't like. And so therefore,
yeah,
existing
the
wouldn't like it, but new players should we try and change the skill tree in
really
a way
like it,
where you don't have this moment of opening up the skill tree and it's like this big thing. Now,
but it's also WoW value.
This is so iconic for Path of Exile.
Yeah.
That I don't think it's something that we could change.
We're just talking out our ass here.
Kill a lot of the the giant skill tree. Like
it's the don't repaint the Mona Lisa.
Discovery when you first open it up is actually iconic enough.
It's WoW. It's the Mona Lisa.
A thing in of itself in some way. Like that's part of the Path of Exile experience in some level is like that moment. So I don't think I would want to get rid of that. I think it is actually sort of important. But at the same time, there is that niggle of annoyingness where I'm like, I agree with you on some level that you want the complexity to slowly evolve over time. And the trouble with a skill tree like this is the fact that, okay, like, no matter how simple, no matter how understandable you make options, if you have 1,000 of them, then the complexity is in which ones should I pick. So there may, like...
Complexity is what the hell do they all do?
It's possible to make a simple but giant passive skill tree. So yeah, that's the tricky part about it. Now we are going to improve all the things we can improve as far as like, you know, being able to understand the stats, and like we've got things that can show you what the exact result of allocating them are and things like that. Like there's a lot of pitfalls we can improve and so on there. But once again, it's very hard to make it so that the thing that you don't necessarily want to open up a build guide. Now the next question is, okay, so there are build guides on the internet. There are always going to be build guides no matter what you do.
I hate it. So I hate it. I wish there's a way to ban them.
Do we want to disencourage? Do we want to disencourage? Encourage? Not sure.
There needs to be a legal way to ban them.
Do we want to encourage not
prison time
looking at them? That's an interesting question.
Take a player out of the game itself, they're suddenly metagaming the mechanics in the game. One example that I was given about, because I love
your mic closer to your mouth
of the skill tree. I do. I genuinely do love it as a whole thing. I think what was difficult for me was that moment of seeing it and being immediately overwhelmed. So I would love it if there was even just a slight ramp up to the level of overwhelm instead of having it thrown at me. Because as soon as I opened it, someone said that just the simplicity of having it zoomed.
It's actually a really simple tree.
Instead of opening it to an already zoomed out state. So I think the default is opening it zoomed out.
You're actually wrong about that. You're actually wrong about that. It does open zoomed in, and then you have to zoom out manually.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But everyone does.
A couple of years ago.
Everyone does though.
Okay. But one of the ideas that we looked at and that I was discussing, this actually comes from martial arts many, many years ago. If I've got it wrong, I'll go back and watch the video I've got, but if I've got it wrong, then I've got it wrong, and I experienced it and remember it wrong. But one thing that I remember vividly from a martial arts lesson was the instructor saying to me, if you walk around the corner and somebody surprise attacks you, even if you know what to do in that situation, because you've had no preparation for it, you are at a massive disadvantage. If you were walking around the corner and someone grabbed you just 5 seconds before and said, hey, there's a guy around there waiting for you, that tiny bit of preparation gives my brain a chance to prepare for what it's about to see.
Sort of a tangent, but it's why I like map knowledge in sound cues and like Rainbow Six and stuff. If you know them, you have an advantage.
Huge, big sphere grid, this level up system is shown to me. I am not expecting the complexity of it. If there was a level to maybe have the first or second level up be tutorialized, if you will, of saying, hey, go here, here, or here for a general build. Choose this one for a melee class, this one for a range class, this one for a magic class. And then the next level up from that was maybe slightly tutorialized. Let's say you went into magic. Do you want to increase your magical shield or your magical damage? Once you've done those two, you can then say to the player, right, the rest of this is about to unlock for you. Good luck with it. And then it kind of zooms out. It would have set my expectations for what I need to do and the level of complexity I'm about to deal with. Is there a way that you can set player expectations for the complexity they're about to be faced with in a way that wouldn't intimidate them?
Yes, but it takes away from what Path of Exile is.
Basically at the start, so you just can't see the whole rest of the tree.
Or the iconic value of what it is.
Shows you it at some point.
I think if a player takes the initiative to want to zoom out instead of following a tutorial idea of click one of these three where it's quite zoomed in, like if they say I'm going to actively take the initiative of seeing
kind of like
how
clicking
this can be, then they should be allowed to do
disable tutorial
that.
thing in the beginning.
It zooms in, you've got the three choices that you can do, and then there's a little tick box in the corner saying tutorial on. You know, level up tutorial for the first 3 levels, yes, no. And as soon as you click no, zooms out, you can do it again. So a brand new player has a choice of playing through a simplified start, but an experienced player can straight away turn it off and go, I know what I'm doing, let's just get straight to it.
So if you just play a random RPG and you open the map and the map is zoomed in around where you are, what's the first thing you do?
You zoom out.
Exactly.
But then away I've got the
idea
of it being zoomed in. I'm prepared for the map. I mean, the first, let's say the first map on...
Normally they're grayed out though.
Is the tutorial
you zoom out and you
is
see
a
nothing.
Very small zone that introduces you to moving about on the map itself. I mean, even in Dark Souls, the very first zone is the Undead Asylum, which is a very small, concentrated version of the rest of the game. Elden Ring, when you first walk out into Limgrave and you've got that huge big open
Final
world
Fantasy
in front
does
of you,
it.
but you've already fought some enemies
Where you see a
there,
town, but then you go out and
you're
it's
about
like
to do
a
I guess
world
the thing that they do,
map,
though,
but then
typically
you
in a game
zoom
like
out
that is that the
again.
points of
Well,
interest,
as you
as it
progress,
were,
you see
tend to
more
be only
points on it, and then you
appearing
zoom out
as you get
again, you
closer
see
to
you're on
that
a
area of the
different
map.
planet.
So that means that all you can
Or
really see
lower
is just the
world or
river. I
whatever.
don't really know what the analog would quite be on a passive skill tree for something like that. Like you could theoretically have something where you can see vaguely. I don't know. It doesn't quite work. I mean, it is a problem I would love to solve, but it really is one that I like thinking about it. I do find it very hard to come up with something that I think that both that players would like, and also feels like Path of Exile, and also has this like problem solved. You know, like,
that's the problem.
It is tough.
I mean, we're not going to solve this. I'm definitely not going to solve this. You guys
Well,
have
aren't we?
years to think about this.
Aren't we though? You never know.
We
Like, it
might
is
find an idea, because your specialization is finding bad ideas and not doing them. And my specialization is coming up with a lot of ideas. So if I come up with a lot of ideas, 99% will be bad, but eventually I'll say something randomly off the cuff, you'll turn around and go, that's not great itself, but we can work with it. And then we mold it into something that might actually be quite useful. People are saying in the chat that the point of the complexity of the skill tree is to effectively scare away players who aren't going to like the game as a whole. And
it's not necessarily something I fully agree with.
I don't agree with that.
No.
I like new players. I love
That's
Path of
never
Exile.
the
I love
goal.
gameplay of it. I love the vibe of it. I love the story, the narrative, the level up system. I think it's a great game. I just want to get rid of those tiny quit moments that would make a player that isn't convinced it's for them stick with it a little bit longer until they then turn around and say, actually, no, I get it now. There's that moment of, I get it now. and we want to
I
keep people
wonder-
playing until that happens.
I want to
Or
give
gives
you
us an answer. I wonder if it's like, why am I getting coding overload? I wonder if it's like Dark Souls 3, where the first tutorial boss, you can't progress until you beat him. You could say the same thing, that it's a weeding out the new players. You're not going to like this game if you can't beat him, and this is what the whole game is going to be. But on the other hand, it's a, okay, this is the game. We're guiding you on this path. This is how you got to beat this guy. You got to learn the moves. You got to learn things. You got to use strategy and stuff to beat this guy. And they're even handholdy with like teaching you all the keybinds and everything right before that. PoE doesn't have the beginning thing. Well, I guess no, it does have the kind of the beginning thing, like equipping it and using it, and doesn't show what key to press, but
one other analog to this, though, that is going in the opposite direction, just as another point here, which is that what we've found and is that, for example, if you don't die in a game till like level 30, then the expectation is that you don't die, and then when you die, you feel frustrated.
Yeah.
Whereas if you kill the player very early on, then
I
the
didn't die in last
expectation is that you
epoch
die, and
until
it sets that expectation
monoliths.
for the rest of the game. And so I suppose you could argue a similar
no,
thing
and I
with the
died in
skill
Act
tree,
7.
that like if the expectation
Then I
is
didn't
this
die
is going to be a
until
game
monoliths.
with big skill trees that you have to you have to make choices in, then you could argue that that sort of sets an expectation that you then meet for the rest of the game. Whereas maybe if you get to level 30, for example,
True, but you don't die to the first enemy.
10, you get to level 10 and then suddenly there's a giant skill tree, like, ah, shit. And then like now it's like, oh, this isn't the game I thought I was playing, and now you actually feel worse about it. It's sort of hard to know, though.
But could we pace the skill tree exposure the same as the death exposure? Because for me, I would say the most deaths in Path of Exile 1, especially to casual players, the first part of the beach is fine. You get to the first kind of hub zone, then you go out onto the beach, and the second beach bit, there's an enemy that I think casts fire on you and just throws a ton of kind of AoE fire around you. That's the kind of one that I'm thinking of. Or the mud flats, as soon as you get to it, that's when you die. So you've had the first bit, we totally get it. I mean, the first exposure
he'll let
to
you die, maybe, if you're not
glimpse and
experienced,
gems
maybe.
is tutorialized. Get them, put them there, put them there, put that there, they link together. I would love it if the skill tree, which so far seems to be the biggest sticking point, if you will, though, for new players, was exposed in the same way as the death, like you've said. You don't kill them straight away, but you do kill them early, or you do make it a challenge early and give them the chance to die early. So maybe the skill tree slowly grows in complexity over the first half an hour of gameplay.
Yeah, I just need to find. I would need to come up with a way to make it happen. And as I said, it's a very difficult one. It really is.
The search function, by the way, is fantastic. We can all, every single person in the chat can collectively agree the search box on the skill tree to search for specific words is fantastic. We are all collectively in agreement.
It doesn't work good enough.
Jonathan, was that you?
I don't think it was.
You could have said yes. You would have had the chat
But I
entirely
didn't.
on your side. You could have taken that.
Look at
quickly,
this.
but you didn't. Thank you for being honest.
But the one that is me and will be new in PoE2 that I'm actually very proud of is the fact that now you can see the difference to your character from hovering over any skill in PoE2. So you can.
So why is
press
this
shift
blinking
and
for
you'll get,
mana?
here's the stat changes that will result, and specifically here are the DPS differences.
Recover
that will
1%
result from
of
all your
mana.
skills from allocating the skill point.
It's too much.
So that will actually, I think, aid a lot of people.
Why is this
We're
blinking
even
for
going to
mana?
have that for
Life is
equipping
blinking for
items
mana.
and even
because
leveling up gems.
mana
And basically
cost.
anywhere where a stat would change, there'll be a preview to be able to
Mana
see
regen.
what the result of that change will be before
It's just
you do
all
it.
blinking.
So that one I will take
Because everything has
credit
mana
for-
in it.
for, getting that sorted out, and
Everything.
that's one I think will help for sure.
Perfect. Beautiful. I'm a big fan of whenever I hover over a
Where's
piece
the
of
mana?
equipment, an item or weapon or armor, I hold shift
recovered
and I
from
can see the
some- skipped it.
changes in what I'm currently wearing, what that is, what'll go up, what'll go down, because that way
Bro,
I'm given
the whole
information
tree, when you
and I
type
feel like
life,
I'm
is
making
blinking. The
choice
entire tree.
correctly. I feel like I'm making the choice with all available information, and that is right for me. And if that's a bad choice, that's then on me, not on the game. Is it going to be slightly easier to respec in Path of Exile 2 if you suddenly decide you don't like what you've built into.
Why is this blinking for
So
fire?
we've already talked a bit about how we're going to use gold. To
Oh,
do the respec system.
exposures.
We didn't really have anything like that before that could quite make that work. Yeah, that should make it easier. What we of course have to work out is what the balance of this is. Because
I think
always been
color
a proponent
coding
of
might
the
help a
fact
little
that
more here.
Respecing should be a journey. When it is a thing where you just push a button and you respec and there's no
Like, instead of these all being gold borders, why not just make this a blue border? Why not make that a red? Why not make that a blue, light, like a ice white blue, like a white? Make mana stuff a particular type of blue. Make life like a reddish. This is more orange, I guess, and then life would be red, and do all that. I don't know, armor like brown and stuff, and like evasion like green, and poison like a deep green. I think that could help. Just color coding. Get rid of this gold around everything. Why is it gold? Why do all these need to be gold? Get rid of it. I think that the nodes themselves might be too small. Is there any reason this node can't be like this big of a circle? It's the same size tree. Maybe right here it would matter. And then make this... Like, make all the small noodles that side and make those ones that size, and then make those ones the same size, but just they have this weird little texture thing around them. I don't know. I think that could help. I don't know.
And there's nothing to it at all. I often have experienced myself a big feeling of dislocation.
They need to add
from
the
my
game
character.
guide.
I no longer identify with it anymore. And especially what's annoying is that when you reallocate everything all at once, you get into the situation where you can often feel like, like it just never quite feels right again. This may not be the experience that everyone gets. But
I know this feeling.
The whole just like push a button, your character's fully respec, you reallocate everything again moment has just been very dislocating for me. So I much prefer the
Your
game.
second character, like even when your
so,
character dies, the
yeah, we're doing it
second
with
character
gold
doesn't
prices,
feel right.
My
My
PoE2.
Obama character
That will mean that it's cheaper
doesn't
the earlier you
feel
do it.
right.
And,
Doesn't feel like the
that
last
should
one.
mean that, like, you know, the thing a lot of people say is
Even
just
though
use
all the
early
skill
game
gems are the
respec that they're
same.
concerned about, so that kind of does achieve
All the
that.
skill points are
And,
the same.
Who would have guessed that
Gear
having
is
gold
what's
in an
slightly
RPG would
different.
be a useful mechanic? That turns out there are
but it still
reasons.
doesn't feel right.
You guys went, you know what? They're probably onto something here.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
There's an old game I played years ago. I can't remember the exact one it was, but respecking had you fight yourself. And I forget which game it was. If I find out, I'll let you know. There was if you chose to respec, it was an old RPG. You had to go through like a gauntlet of enemies, and the final boss was you, exactly as you are, with your own kind of weapons and your
I
own
like
stats.
when games do
You
that.
had
Baldur's,
evil you
yeah,
had
Baldur's Gate does
unlimited
it.
health, and the more damage you could do to evil you in this fight, the more kind of skill points you would effectively rip away from yourself when the fight finished. And when the fight finished and you finally died, you showed how much damage you did to you, and this is how many skill points you've now managed to take
What
away
game
from
is this?
yourself, and you can choose to reallocate
Never
them
heard of
later.
that.
That was really cool, because if you were super powerful, respecking was then relatively difficult because you had to fight super powered you. Whereas if you were mid-length, mid-level, fighting mid-level you was actually okay because you didn't have all the skills, and the computer used to play you really well.
You know,
What
where I
game
thought
is
you were
this?
going with that was that you did your respec, and then to lock it in, you had to beat yourself with your old build. And then the theory being that you have to be able to be better than what you were before you did you have to prove that your respec is better than what you had.
That would be
before.
funny.
I thought it was kind of an interesting idea.
That would be actually a funny way to
There
do
is
it.
a kind of league in the future where you have to fight an evil mirror version of you. I'm taking full
And it
credit
wouldn't
for that.
work.
That's
The
our
damage
idea
to
then. Jonathan, we made
defense
it
is
right
too
now.
high. They'd have to
Evil
put
version
PvP
in the
scaling
future,
on.
we can do it.
then
Jonathan,
you
I've had
follow
for
the
about 2
Grandmasters.
hours so far, which is honestly about 1 hour and 59 minutes longer than I normally have anyone for. So, is there anything else you would
Oh,
like
damn, we're at the end of the
to
interview.
bring up before we call this interview to a close?
I don't know. It's the open-ended questions I always find the hardest. So yeah, that is honestly a tough one. Yeah, they're really, I don't know. I feel like we've covered all sorts of random stuff.
We really have.
I like this
You know,
interview.
I'm personally good. Like
I
I've got nothing else
might.
to say.
Let's end on a high note then.
Obviously,
Oh
Everyone in the
wait.
chat is probably going to play this game as soon as it comes out. But for anyone who isn't, anyone who doesn't know about it or doesn't yet care, Jonathan, why should someone play Path of Exile 2?
I think just because it's a good game, really. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Like, you know, I don't know what else to say. And that really is what I'm hoping. I just want to make. I just want to make the best game.
It's
Yeah,
a
I
good
just wanna make
game
the
and a
best
good
game I
use of your
can,
time.
So I'm hoping
If you're
that
looking
this
to play a
one's better
game.
than the last one.
Brilliant.
And
the
you
last
know,
one was
and
pretty damn good.
it's free.
Let's be fair.
So you know, let's try and do even better.
All right, cool.
that's
You should
cool.
play Path of Exile 2 because it is a good game. Everyone in the chat, that is
I hope I
4,000 people.
don't regret saying that.
No, don't.
Oh,
it was
no.
perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
That is very
gonna be the
clippable.
quote when it comes out. You know, massive Path of Exile 2 release. Jonathan, lead game designer. It's quite good. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be fantastic. It's the first sextuple A game, 6A game. We've already confirmed it here, and you've said there are
forgot the
quite a
thought that I
few
was gonna say.
new systems that you've managed to chat about and at least hint at. So, everyone in the
I
chat,
remember.
thank you very much for joining us. And Jonathan, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for chatting to me.
No problem.
Thanks,
Brent. It was an
Josh.
excellent
Thanks,
chat.
Jonathan.
Right, you
See you later.
guys go and enjoy the rest of your week. I'm going to go and build some Warhammer. Take care, good night, and God bless.
See you later.
Okay. That might be my favorite interview so far. So it was talking about the game. We learned stuff new about the game. And it was... It wasn't PoE2 philosophy, it was the origin of PoE2 philosophy. And analogies and examples. I really liked that interview. Yeah, I don't know. I can't put... I mean, besides those reasons, I don't know why. I think that is probably the best interview so far. Is it because Josh is really good at interviewing and everybody else that did it is just streamers? Just gamers? Didn't feel like he asked, like, community questions either. They seemed like they were from him, which was really nice. Yeah, that was cool. I think that is my favorite interview, which... What I said before was I didn't like these interviews because we learned nothing new. We didn't really. I mean, we learned about the Dark Souls thing. But we didn't really learn anything new, and that's why I wasn't like them before, but... I mean, him just talking about, like, Starfield and stuff, was interesting. But maybe I'd like it for a different reason. Maybe that's it. Maybe I liked this interview a lot more because it wasn't a... Alright, we want to know about PoE2. We want to know what is the base damage of Arc. We would like to know that. We would like to know how it works with chaining and chain support. It wasn't that. It was, you know... what do you take from other games to, like... things you take and like and hate about other games that you put into Path of Exile 2. Maybe that's why. I don't know. Good interview, Josh. I'll admit, I was skeptical. I thought this interview was not going to be very good. As he's someone who doesn't really play Path of Exile, I was looking at his past VODs, like he's playing New Vegas, like the past few weeks. I don't even know if he's played this league at all. But, he probably has. He probably played launch day. I think I remember seeing clips of him on launch day, so yeah. Anyways, good interview. There's a lot of things that I still take away at the end of the day. I'm very nervous for Path of Exile 2. I really, really do think it's going to be a coin flip, whether it's really good or really bad. I don't like the idea of them working on PoE1 because it feels like they're hedging their bets, like, oh, it's going to be bad. can always go back and play the other one. It's not like, you know, Skyrim or something where they... Imagine if they just kept releasing DLC for Skyrim while working on Elder Scrolls 6. That would feel weird, right? Funny thing they could do. What if they just... It wouldn't work that well with microtransactions. I don't think they should allow your microtransactions to skip over. What if they opened up PoE to modding? And they said, you guys make your own leagues. So it would continue, but it would be community funded. And like servers, they could just buy servers to host leagues and stuff. The same as they already do. That could be interesting. It'd bring a whole new aspect, or a whole new part of the community. I only have that thought, I think, right now because I'm playing RimWorld and all the modding and stuff, and they're talking about Skyrim and all the modding, and like Starfield's not getting any work put into it anymore, I don't think. They're just... Modders are going to take over that game. Fallout modders are going to take over that game. Yeah. Alright. That's been another PoE2 interview with Jonathan. We made some progress on this character. Got him 11 levels. He's a little bit stronger than he was when we started. I think he only had 3k HP. Now he has almost 4. But yeah. Good interview. I'll catch you guys in the next PoE related video. I don't know what it's going to be. It's probably going to be a build update on all the characters, like what I'm doing. It might be clearing all the bosses in like one video. It's one of those two. All right, later.